Good evening and welcome to Embers and Pages, where we retell the world's most beautiful stories in a voice meant for rest. How are you this evening? I hope the day has been kind. If your thoughts are tangled, if you've been trying too hard to control what cannot be controlled, you've found sanctuary. Here, we release our grip. We stop orchestrating and simply surrender to story. If this is your first visit, settle in, you belong here. For those returning, your presence is a gift. If tonight's tale brings you comfort, perhaps leave a like, share it with a restless soul who needs stillness, or tell us in the comments which classic should follow. This small community thrives on your gentle participation. Tonight, we enter the elegant, sunlit world of Highbury, where Jane Austen invites us into Emma, published in 1815, a story about a young woman who believes she understands everyone's heart except her own. Emma Woodhouse is handsome, clever, rich, and absolutely certain she knows what's best for everyone around her. She delights in matchmaking, in arranging others' happiness like pieces on a chessboard. But the heart, you see, refuses to be managed. And Emma is about to discover that the love she's been orchestrating for others has been quietly growing in the one place she never thought to look, right beside her, all along. Let us prepare for rest now. Soften whatever light remains, or embrace the darkness entirely. Turn the sound down until you must lean in to hear. This small effort helps the restless mind finally quiet. Adjust your pillows, let your weight settle, allow your muscles to release their hold. Draw the covers close if you wish. Your eyes may close or drift half open, it doesn't matter. Breathe slowly, gently, with no purpose except to be here, listening, drifting. Please don't fight if sleep begins to claim you mid-sentence before you know how it ends. The story isn't leaving, it will wait. Your task tonight is not to finish, but to float, to let go, to rest. We begin in the drawing room at Hartfield, where Emma sits arranging flowers, smiling at her latest matchmaking success, entirely satisfied with her cleverness, not yet suspecting that the heart she thinks she knows so well, her own, is about to teach her the most surprising lesson of all. The afternoon light is honey gold, the air smells of roses, and change, disguised as ordinary days, is already quietly arriving. Emma Woodhouse was 21 years old and had lived all those years in comfort and contentment at Hartfield, her father's estate in the village of Highbury. She was, as she herself might have admitted with a smile, handsome, clever, and rich. The world had been kind to her, perhaps too kind, for Emma had never known hardship, never known want, never known the sharp education that sorrow sometimes brings. Her mother had died when Emma was very young, too young to remember the loss with any real grief. In her mother's place had come Miss Taylor, the governess who had raised Emma with gentle affection and who had, over the years, become less a governess and more a dear friend. For 16 years, Miss Taylor had been Emma's companion, her confidant, the warm presence that made Hartfield feel like home. But now Miss Taylor was gone. Or rather, she was Mrs. Weston now, married just this evening to Mr. Weston of Randalls, a good man who had loved her patiently and well. It was a beautiful match. Emma herself had encouraged it, had perhaps, she thought with quiet satisfaction, even brought it about. She had seen the way Mr. Weston looked at Miss Taylor, had gently nudged them together at dinners and gatherings, had created opportunities for them to discover what Emma had already known, that they belonged together. And so the wedding had taken place, and Emma had stood in the church with genuine happiness for her friend. But now, as she sat in the drawing room of Hartfield with only her father for company, she felt the emptiness where Miss Taylor's presence used to be. The house was quieter, the evenings stretched longer, even the firelight seemed a little dimmer without Miss Taylor's gentle laugh to fill the room. Mr. Woodhouse, Emma's father, sat across from her, a blanket over his knees despite the warmth of the fire. He was a kind man, a gentle soul, but he was easily worried, easily distressed by change of any kind. The marriage of Miss Taylor had troubled him deeply. He could not understand why anyone would choose to marry, to leave the comfort and safety of the familiar for the uncertainty of something new. Poor Miss Taylor, he said softly, shaking his head, to be taken away from us, and on such a wet evening too. I do hope she will not catch cold at Randalls. Papa, Emma said gently, though she had said it many times already. Miss Taylor is very happy. Mr. Weston will take excellent care of her, and Randalls is only half a mile away. We shall see her often. But Mr. Woodhouse could not be comforted. Change to him was always a loss, never a gain. He would mourn Miss Taylor's absence as though she had traveled to the ends of the earth, rather than simply down the lane. Emma sighed and looked into the fire. She would miss Miss Taylor, too. She would miss the easy conversations, the shared laughter, the comfort of having a companion who understood her, but she did not regret encouraging the match. Love, she believed, was worth pursuing. Happiness was worth the small sacrifices it required. And besides, Emma thought with a small smile, she had done very well as a matchmaker. She had seen the potential in Mr. Weston and Miss Taylor before they had seen it themselves. She had brought them together, had helped them find their happiness. It was a satisfying accomplishment. Perhaps, she thought, she might try her hand at matchmaking again. There were several people in Highbury who might benefit from a little guidance, a little gentle encouragement toward happiness. Emma had time, after all. She had intelligence. She had taste. Why should she not use those gifts to bring a little more love into the world? The idea pleased her. It gave her something to think about, something to turn her mind toward in the quiet evenings ahead. She would not be lonely. She would be useful. She would find someone in need of her help, someone whose happiness she could secure, and she would set to work with the same skill and care she had applied to Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston. Emma did not yet know that matchmaking was more complicated than she imagined. She did not know that the human heart resists orchestration, that love follows its own path regardless of what clever hands try to shape it. She thought herself very wise in matters of the heart, though her own heart had never been tested. She thought she understood people, though she had never bothered to look very deeply into her own desires. But the fire was warm and the evening was soft, and Emma felt pleased with herself and the world. She had done a good thing. She would do more good things. Life, she thought, was really very manageable when one had sense and taste and a little determination. Mr. Knightley arrived just as Emma was settling into these comfortable thoughts. He was an old family friend, the owner of Donwell Abbey, and a man whose good sense and steady temperament balanced Mr. Woodhouse's anxieties. He came often to Hartfield, and Emma was always glad to see him. They argued sometimes. He had a habit of pointing out her faults with a frankness that both irritated and amused her, but she respected him. He was one of the few people in Highbury who would tell her the truth, even when the truth was not flattering. "Well, Emma," he said as he settled into a chair by the fire, "how do you feel now that poor Miss Taylor has been carried off? Are you managing without her?" "I am managing perfectly well," Emma said, lifting her chin slightly. "And Miss Taylor has not been carried off. She has married a good man and is very happy." "You encouraged the match, as I recall," Mr. Knightley said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "I did," Emma admitted, "and I was right to do so. They are very well suited. And now you are alone with your father, and the evenings are long, and you are wondering what to do with yourself." Emma frowned. He was too perceptive, as always. "I am wondering no such thing. I have plenty to occupy me." "Such as?" Emma hesitated. She did not want to tell him about her matchmaking plans. He would only disapprove, would tell her she was meddling where she had no business. But she could not help herself. The idea was too new, too bright in her mind to keep entirely hidden. "I may," she said carefully, "take an interest in the happiness of others. There are several people in Highbury who could benefit from a little guidance." Mr. Knightley raised an eyebrow. "Guidance? You mean matchmaking?" "I mean," Emma said, "helping people see what is best for them." "Emma," he said, and there was a note of warning in his voice, "leave well enough alone. People do not need you to arrange their lives for them." "But I did very well with Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston," Emma protested. "You did nothing at all. They would have found each other perfectly well without you." "You cannot know that," Emma said, though a small doubt crept into her mind. Mr. Knightley leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Emma, you have a good heart, but you have lived a very sheltered life. You think you understand people because you have observed them, but observation is not the same as understanding. I would caution you against meddling in matters of the heart. It rarely ends well." Emma felt a flash of irritation. He was always so certain, so sure that he knew better than she did. "I think you underestimate me, Mr. Knightley. I am quite capable of understanding people." "I hope you are right," he said quietly, "but I fear you will learn, sooner or later, that the heart is not as easily managed as you believe." Emma said nothing. She did not want to argue with him, and she knew he meant well, but she also knew that she was right. She had a gift for seeing what others could not see, for understanding what people needed to be happy, and she would prove it given time. The fire crackled, and the evening deepened into night, and Emma sat with her father and Mr. Knightley, content in her comfortable world. She did not know that her certainties would soon be challenged. She did not know that her heart, which she thought so well guarded and so thoroughly understood, would surprise her more than she could imagine. For now, she was simply Emma, clever and confident, ready to shape the world to her vision of how it should be. And perhaps that was enough for this one quiet evening. Tomorrow would bring new plans, new schemes, new opportunities to be useful. But tonight, in the warmth of Hartfield, Emma rested in the satisfaction of a job well done and dreamed of the matches she would make, the happiness she would bring, the love she would guide into being. If only she had known. If only someone had told her that the heart she should have been studying was her own. But wisdom, as it often does, would come slowly, through error and misunderstanding, and the gentle, patient lessons that life teaches those who think they already know everything. Harriet Smith arrived in Emma's life like a gift, though Emma did not think of it quite that way. She thought of Harriet as a project, as someone in need of improvement and guidance, someone whose happiness Emma could shape with the same satisfaction she had felt in arranging the match between Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston. But Harriet, sweet, unknowing Harriet, was more than a project. She was a living, feeling person with her own heart and her own path to walk. Emma simply did not see that yet. Harriet was 17, a student at Mrs. Goddard's school in Highbury, and she was pretty in a soft, unassuming way. She had fair hair and blue eyes, a gentle manner, and an eagerness to please that Emma found both charming and useful. What Emma found most intriguing about Harriet, though, was the mystery of her birth. Harriet was the natural daughter of someone unknown, and had been placed at Mrs. Goddard's school with an allowance that suggested she was not entirely without connections. Emma, with her active imagination and her love of arranging things, saw possibility in this mystery. Surely, Emma thought, Harriet must be the daughter of someone important, someone of good family who could not publicly acknowledge her. Perhaps a gentleman of fortune, perhaps even someone in the nobility. It was romantic, it was interesting, and it meant, Emma decided, that Harriet deserved better than the small, limited world of Mrs. Goddard's school. She deserved to be introduced to good society, to be given opportunities, to be matched with someone worthy of her undiscovered lineage. And so Emma adopted Harriet as her companion, inviting her to Hartfield, introducing her to the small circle of families in Highbury, treating her as though she were already a lady of consequence rather than a schoolgirl of uncertain parentage. Harriet was overwhelmed by the attention, grateful beyond words for Emma's kindness. She looked at Emma with wide, trusting eyes and agreed with everything Emma said, which Emma found very satisfying indeed. They walked together through the lanes of Highbury, and Harriet talked, shyly at first, then with growing confidence, about her life at Mrs. Goddard's, about the other girls, about the small pleasures and petty dramas of her limited world. Emma listened with half her attention, already planning how she might elevate Harriet, how she might find her a match that would astonish everyone. It was during one of these walks that Harriet mentioned Robert Martin. She mentioned him casually, with a smile that Emma should have noticed, should have understood. But Emma was not looking for what was already there. She was looking for what she wanted to create. Mr. Martin has been very kind to me, Harriet said softly. He and his sisters often invite me to Abbey Mill Farm. They are very good people, very kind. A farmer, Emma said, her tone dismissive. Well, I am sure they are kind in their way. But Harriet, you must not limit yourself to such society. You deserve better. Better? Harriet looked confused. But Mr. Martin is very respectable. His farm is prosperous, and he is very intelligent. He reads books and... A farmer, Emma repeated, more firmly this time. Harriet, you do not understand your own worth. With your beauty and your sweetness, you could attract the attention of someone much more suitable. A gentleman, not a farmer. Harriet fell silent, her expression uncertain. She had been happy thinking of Mr. Martin, happy in her small, simple affections. But Emma's words planted a seed of doubt. If Emma, who was so clever and so assured, thought Harriet deserved better, then perhaps she did. Perhaps her feelings for Robert Martin, which had seemed so right and natural, were actually a mistake, a settling for less than she should accept. Emma, seeing Harriet's hesitation, pressed her advantage. I have someone in mind for you, Harriet, someone far more appropriate to your station. Mr. Elton, the vicar. He is a gentleman, educated, well-mannered, and he has a comfortable income. I have noticed the way he looks at you. I believe with a little encouragement he could be brought to declare himself. Mr. Elton, Harriet's voice was faint with surprise. But Miss Woodhouse, he is so far above me, I could never— Nonsense, Emma said briskly. You are perfectly suited to him. Trust me, Harriet, I know about these things. I brought Miss Taylor and Mr. Weston together, did I not? And they are very happy. I can do the same for you. Harriet, who wanted desperately to believe Emma, who wanted to think that she might deserve a gentleman like Mr. Elton, allowed herself to be convinced. She pushed aside her feelings for Robert Martin, buried them under the weight of Emma's certainty. Emma knew best. Emma was wise. If Emma said Mr. Elton was the right match, then surely he was. What Emma did not see, what she refused to see, was the damage she was doing. Robert Martin was a good man, an honest man, and he loved Harriet. He loved her not for what she might be or what her mysterious parentage might mean, but for who she was, gentle, kind, genuine. He had been planning to propose, had been gathering his courage, had been imagining a future with Harriet at Abbey Mill Farm. When he finally did propose, writing a letter that was simple and heartfelt and full of real affection, Harriet brought it to Emma with trembling hands. She did not know what to do. Part of her wanted to say yes, to accept the safety and kindness of Mr. Martin's offer. But Emma had filled her head with other ideas, with dreams of Mr. Elton and a life far grander than anything a farmer could offer. Emma read the letter with barely concealed disdain. It is well written, I will grant him that, she said, though in truth it was a better letter than she had expected. But Harriet, you cannot seriously consider accepting him. Think of what you would be giving up. Think of Mr. Elton. But Mr. Elton has not proposed, Harriet said softly. He will, Emma said with confidence. I am certain of it. You must refuse Mr. Martin, Harriet. Refuse him kindly, but refuse him. And Harriet, trusting, eager to please, did as Emma asked. She wrote a letter of refusal, her hand shaking as she formed the words that would break Robert Martin's heart. Emma supervised the letter, ensuring it was firm and final, leaving no room for hope. When it was done, when the letter was sent, Emma felt a sense of triumph. She had saved Harriet from a mediocre life. She had kept her free for something better. But Harriet felt no triumph. She felt only a strange, hollow sadness, as though she had just closed a door on something warm and safe. She tried to push the feeling away, tried to focus on Mr. Elton and the future Emma had planned for her. But at night, when she was alone, she thought of Robert Martin, of his kind eyes and his quiet strength, and she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Emma, meanwhile, turned her attention to encouraging Mr. Elton. She found excuses to include him in their activities, to invite him to Hartfield, to place him in Harriet's company. She saw affection in every smile, encouragement in every polite word. She was so certain of her plan that she could not see the truth that was right in front of her. Mr. Elton was attentive, yes. He was charming, yes. But his attentions were not directed at Harriet. They were directed at Emma herself. He saw in Emma a woman of fortune and consequence, someone who could elevate his position, someone worth pursuing. Harriet was merely the excuse that brought him into Emma's company. But Emma, confident in her understanding of people, saw only what she wanted to see. She arranged for Harriet to sit for a portrait, with Mr. Elton offering to frame it. She interpreted his eagerness as proof of his affection for Harriet, when in truth he was simply eager to be near Emma, to do anything that might win her favor. Harriet, caught between Emma's certainty and her own confusion, tried to believe that Mr. Elton cared for her. She tried to feel the fluttering excitement that Emma said she should feel. But the truth was, she felt nothing when she looked at Mr. Elton. Her heart remained stubbornly quiet, stubbornly turned toward the memory of Robert Martin and the life she had given up. The autumn deepened, and the air grew cold, and Emma continued her matchmaking with unwavering confidence. She had no doubt that everything would work out exactly as she planned. She had no sense of the heartbreak she was creating, the confusion she was sowing. She thought only of the satisfaction she would feel when Mr. Elton proposed to Harriet, when her plan came to fruition, when everyone acknowledged that she had been right all along. Mr. Knightley watched all this with growing concern. He saw what Emma could not see, that Harriet had been perfectly happy with Robert Martin, that Emma was encouraging expectations in Mr. Elton that would lead nowhere good, that the whole scheme was built on misunderstanding and pride. He tried gently to warn Emma. "You are making a mistake with Harriet," he said one evening at Hartfield. "Robert Martin is a good match for her. You should not have interfered." "I have not interfered," Emma said coldly. "I have helped her see her own worth." "You have filled her head with nonsense," Mr. Knightley said, "and you will regret it." But Emma would not listen. She was too certain, too pleased with herself. And so the autumn passed, and the stage was set for the revelation that would shatter Emma's confidence and teach her, for the first time in her comfortable life, that she did not know everything she thought she knew. The revelation came on a cold December evening, in a carriage returning from a dinner party at Randall's. Emma should have seen it coming. Looking back, she would see all the signs she had missed, all the moments of misunderstanding that had led to this terrible, humiliating night. But in the moment, she was blindsided, completely unprepared for the truth that Mr. Elton was about to force upon her. The evening had started pleasantly enough. Emma and Harriet had been invited to dine with Mr. and Mrs. Weston, and Mr. Elton, ever eager to be where Emma was, had secured an invitation as well. The dinner was warm and cheerful, the conversation pleasant. Emma had been in high spirits, pleased with how often Mr. Elton had spoken to Harriet, how attentive he had seemed. She thought she saw progress in her matchmaking plan. She thought everything was proceeding exactly as it should. But Harriet had developed a sore throat and had stayed behind at Hartfield with Mr. Woodhouse. It was just Emma and Mr. Elton in the carriage on the return journey, the cold December night pressing close around them, the darkness absolute except for the carriage lamps swaying with the motion of the wheels. Emma had been thinking about Harriet, about how disappointed she must be to have missed the evening, about how Emma would tell her all about Mr. Elton's attentions. She had been planning her next move in the matchmaking strategy, considering how to engineer a proposal, when Mr. Elton suddenly moved closer to her on the seat. "Miss Woodhouse," he said, and there was something urgent in his voice, something that made Emma's breath catch with sudden unease. "Yes," she said, drawing back slightly. "I must speak," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "I can no longer contain what I feel. You must know, you must have seen, how much I admire you, how ardently I have wished for the opportunity to tell you what is in my heart." Emma stared at him, confusion flooding through her. "Mr. Elton, I do not understand. Do not be coy, Miss Woodhouse. You have encouraged me at every turn. The hours we have spent together, the portrait, the kindness you have shown me, all of it has given me hope that my affections are not unwelcome. I am a man of modest means, I know, but I believe I can make you happy. I believe we are suited in temperament and understanding. Emma, may I call you Emma? I am asking you to be my wife." The shock of it struck Emma like cold water. Mr. Elton was not speaking of Harriet. He had never been speaking of Harriet. Every smile, every courtesy, every moment of attention that Emma had interpreted as affection for Harriet had actually been directed at Emma herself. The entire foundation of her matchmaking plan had been built on a complete misunderstanding. "Mr. Elton," she said, her voice shaking with mortification and anger, "you are mistaken. I have no intention. Surely you do not mean to refuse me," he said, and there was an edge to his voice now, a hint of wounded pride. "You have given me every reason to believe my suit would be welcome. You have sought my company, included me in your activities. For Harriet," Emma cried. "Everything I did was to encourage your affection for Harriet Smith. Did you not understand that?" The silence that followed was dreadful. Mr. Elton drew back as though she had struck him. His expression, visible in the dim light of the carriage lamps, shifted from shock to indignation. "Harriet Smith," he repeated, his tone incredulous. "You thought I was courting Harriet Smith, a girl of no family, no fortune, no connections. Miss Woodhouse, surely you know me better than that. I would never presume to court a woman so far beneath my station." Emma felt fury rising in her chest, hot and sharp. Harriet Smith is a sweet, good-hearted young woman who deserves far better than the attentions of a man who would dismiss her so cruelly. "And I," Mr. Elton said, his own anger evident now, "deserve better than to be refused by a woman who has spent weeks encouraging me, only to pretend she meant nothing by it. I thought you a woman of sense, Miss Woodhouse. I see I was mistaken." The rest of the carriage ride passed in terrible, strained silence. Emma sat as far from Mr. Elton as the small space would allow, her mind spinning with humiliation and fury and dawning horror at what she had done. She had been so certain, so confident in her understanding of the situation, and she had been completely, catastrophically wrong. When the carriage finally reached Hartfield, Emma climbed down without a word and hurried inside, leaving Mr. Elton to continue on to the vicarage in offended silence. She went straight to her room, closed the door, and stood in the darkness, trying to collect herself, trying to understand how she could have been so foolish. She had encouraged Harriet to refuse Robert Martin, a good man who genuinely loved her, in favor of Mr. Elton, who had never cared for Harriet at all. She had filled Harriet's head with false hopes, with dreams of a match that had never been a possibility. And all the while, Mr. Elton had been pursuing Emma herself, interpreting her kindness as encouragement, building expectations that Emma had no intention of fulfilling. The portrait sitting, which Emma had arranged so carefully, Mr. Elton had been flattering Emma, not Harriet. The framing of the portrait, which Emma had thought so romantic, Mr. Elton had done it to please Emma, not to preserve an image of the woman he loved. Every moment, every gesture, every word she had interpreted as part of her successful matchmaking had actually been part of a courtship directed at her. How could she have been so blind? How could she have missed something so obvious? The answer, she knew with painful clarity, was that she had seen only what she wanted to see. She had been so enamored with her own cleverness, so confident in her ability to arrange other people's lives, that she had not bothered to truly look at what was actually happening. And Harriet, oh poor Harriet, what would Emma tell her? How could she explain that the match she had promised, the gentleman she had encouraged Harriet to hope for, had never been a real possibility? Harriet would be heartbroken. Worse, she would realize that she had given up Robert Martin, a man who truly cared for her, for nothing, for a fantasy that Emma had created out of her own pride and imagination. Emma sank down onto the window seat in her room, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. Outside, the night was dark and still, the December frost glittering faintly in the moonlight. Inside, Emma felt the weight of her own arrogance settling onto her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She thought of Mr. Knightley's warning, which she had dismissed so easily. He had told her she was meddling, that she would regret it. He had been right, and she had been too stubborn to listen. She thought of Harriet's trembling hands as she wrote the letter refusing Robert Martin, and Emma wanted to weep with shame. This was what came of thinking she knew better than everyone else. This was what came of playing with people's hearts as though they were pieces in a game. She had hurt Harriet, humiliated herself, and created a rift with Mr. Elton that would make things awkward in Highbury for months to come. All because she could not resist the temptation to meddle, to arrange, to control. The next morning, Emma woke with a headache and a heart full of dread. She would have to tell Harriet the truth. She would have to admit that she had been wrong, that her matchmaking had failed, that Mr. Elton had never cared for Harriet at all. It would be one of the hardest conversations she had ever had. But before she could speak to Harriet, news arrived that made everything even more complicated. Mr. Elton, mortified by his rejection and eager to escape the awkwardness of Highbury, had left for Bath. And from Bath, a few weeks later, came word that Mr. Elton had become engaged. He was to marry a Miss Augusta Hawkins, a woman of some fortune and considerable pretension. Emma heard the news with a mixture of relief and fresh embarrassment. At least Mr. Elton would not be lingering in Highbury, a constant reminder of her humiliation. But his quick engagement to another woman made it painfully clear how little he had actually cared for Emma. She had been a prospect, a possibility, nothing more. And when that door had closed, he had simply moved on to the next opportunity. When Emma finally told Harriet about Mr. Elton's proposal and rejection, about his engagement to Miss Hawkins, Harriet took it with a quiet, resigned sadness that was somehow worse than tears. She did not blame Emma, which made Emma feel even more guilty. She simply accepted, with her usual gentle submission, that her hopes had been dashed, that the future Emma had promised her was not going to happen. "I am sorry, Harriet," Emma said, her voice thick with genuine remorse. "I was wrong. I should never have encouraged you to refuse Mr. Martin. I should never have made you believe that Mr. Elton cared for you. I was foolish and arrogant, and I have hurt you terribly." "You meant well, Miss Woodhouse," Harriet said softly. "I know you did, but meaning well was not enough." Emma knew that now. good intentions could not undo the damage she had caused. She had learned a hard lesson about the dangers of meddling in other people's lives, about the cost of being too certain of her own judgment. And as the winter deepened and the days grew short, Emma resolved to do better. She would not try to matchmake again. She would leave people to find their own happiness in their own way without her interference. It was a humbling resolution, a hard-won piece of wisdom. But Emma, for all her faults, was capable of learning, or at least she thought she was. Time would tell whether the lesson would truly stick, or whether her pride and her love of arranging things would tempt her to meddle once again. The weeks that followed Mr. Elton's departure were subdued at Hartfield. Emma moved through her days with a new awareness of her own fallibility, a consciousness of having been wrong that sat uncomfortably in her chest. She was not accustomed to failure. She was not practiced at humility, and so the lesson, though necessary, was not an easy one. Harriet, dear forgiving Harriet, continued to visit Hartfield, continued to accept Emma's friendship with her usual gentle grace. But Emma could see the shadow in Harriet's eyes, the quiet sadness that had replaced the hopeful brightness that Emma had once encouraged. And every time Emma saw that sadness, she felt the weight of her mistake settle more heavily on her conscience. She thought often of Robert Martin, of the proposal Harriet had refused at Emma's urging. She wondered if there was any way to undo that damage, any possibility that Mr. Martin might still care for Harriet after such a rejection. But she did not know how to approach the subject, and her pride still bristled at the idea of admitting to Mr. Knightley, who had warned her against exactly this outcome, that she had been wrong. The winter passed slowly. Snow fell softly on Highbury, transforming the familiar lanes and fields into something quiet and strange. Emma spent long hours by the fire at Hartfield, reading or working at her embroidery, trying to occupy her mind with anything other than the uncomfortable reflections that kept surfacing despite her best efforts to push them away. Mr. Knightley came to visit, as he always did, and Emma braced herself for his reproach. She knew he had heard about Mr. Elton's proposal and subsequent engagement to Miss Hawkins. She knew he would have drawn the obvious conclusions about Emma's failed matchmaking scheme. But when he spoke to her about it, his tone was gentle rather than triumphant, concerned rather than scolding. "I am sorry you were distressed by Mr. Elton's behavior," he said quietly, as they sat together in the drawing room one grey afternoon. "I hope you are recovering from the shock of it." "I am perfectly well," Emma said, though her voice was not as steady as she would have liked. "It was an unfortunate misunderstanding." "It was indeed," Mr. Knightley said, "and I hope, Emma, that you will take from it a lesson about the dangers of interfering in other people's affections." Emma felt a flash of her old defensiveness, but she pushed it down. He was right, and she knew it. "I have learned my lesson," she said quietly. "I will not attempt matchmaking again." Mr. Knightley studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I hope that is true," he said. "You have a good heart, Emma, but you have lived a very protected life. You think you understand people, but there is much you do not see. It would be wise to observe more and meddle less." The words stung, but Emma could not argue with them. She nodded, accepting the rebuke with as much grace as she could muster. And Mr. Knightley, satisfied that she had truly learned something from the experience, let the subject drop and moved on to other, easier topics of conversation. But if Emma thought her embarrassment was complete, she was mistaken. In early spring, Mr. Elton returned to Highbury, and with him came his new bride. Mrs. Augusta Elton swept into Highbury society like a small, brightly colored storm, full of opinions and pretensions, and a determined cheerfulness that grated on Emma's nerves from the very first meeting. Mrs. Elton was the daughter of a Bristol merchant who had made his fortune in trade, and she carried herself as though she were descended from nobility. She spoke constantly of her brother-in-law's estate, Maple Grove, comparing everything in Highbury unfavorably to the splendors she had known there. She called Mr. Knightley Knightley without the proper prefix, to his visible irritation. And worst of all, she adopted a condescending, overly familiar manner toward Emma, as though they were intimate friends rather than recent acquaintances. "My dear Miss Woodhouse," Mrs. Elton said at their first meeting, taking Emma's hand with a warmth that Emma found entirely unwelcome. "I have heard so much about you. Mr. E speaks of you often. We must be great friends, you and I. I dare say Highbury will be much more tolerable with someone of sense to talk to. Emma, who had spent her entire life being the most important young woman in Highbury, found Mrs. Elton's presumption almost unbearable. But she smiled and said all the polite things that were expected and bore the visit with as much composure as she could manage. When Mrs. Elton finally left, Emma felt exhausted, as though she had been running a race. "She is dreadful," Emma said to Harriet later. "Utterly dreadful." Harriet, who had been introduced to Mrs. Elton with barely concealed disdain from the vicar's wife, nodded sadly. "She called my situation quite unfortunate. She said it with such pity, as though I were to be pitied." Emma felt a fresh wave of anger on Harriet's behalf, but also a deeper current of guilt. Mrs. Elton's condescension toward Harriet was a direct result of Emma's actions. If Emma had not encouraged Harriet to aspire above her station, if she had not rejected Robert Martin on Harriet's behalf, then Harriet would not now be in this awkward, undefined position in Highbury society. The presence of Mr. and Mrs. Elton in Highbury was a constant reminder of Emma's failure. At every social gathering, at every dinner party, Emma had to endure Mrs. Elton's chatter and Mr. Elton's carefully polite distance. It was mortifying, and it was exactly what Emma deserved. She had created this situation through her own arrogance and meddling, and now she had to live with the consequences. But slowly, painfully, Emma began to change. The easy confidence that had once characterized everything she did was tempered now by a new awareness of her own limitations. She began to watch more carefully, to listen more closely, to question her own judgments before acting on them. She was learning, though the lessons were hard and the process slow, what it meant to be truly humble. Harriet, meanwhile, was slowly recovering from the disappointment of Mr. Elton. The sharp pain of it had faded to a dull ache, and then to a wistful sadness that surfaced only occasionally. She spent more time at Mrs. Goddard's school, less time at Hartfield. Emma worried that she was withdrawing, that the friendship between them had been damaged beyond repair by Emma's mistakes. One afternoon, as they walked together through the lanes near Highbury, Harriet spoke suddenly of Robert Martin. "I saw him in town last week," she said softly. "He was with his sisters. He looked, well, happy, perhaps." Emma's heart twisted with guilt. "I am sure he is a good man," she said carefully. "I should not have encouraged you to refuse him, Harriet. I see that now." Harriet was quiet for a long moment. "I think," she said finally, "that I was happy when I thought he cared for me, happier than I have been since. But it is too late now. He will have moved on. He will not wish to be reminded of someone who refused him so unkindly." "Perhaps," Emma said, though she hoped desperately that it was not true. "But Harriet, if there were ever a chance, if Mr. Martin were ever to show interest again, I hope you would not let my previous advice influence you. I was wrong. I see that now. And I hope you will forgive me for the pain I caused you." Harriet smiled, a small sad smile that broke Emma's heart. "There is nothing to forgive, Miss Woodhouse. You have always been kind to me, kinder than I deserved." But Emma knew better. She had not been kind. She had been arrogant and controlling and blind to the real feelings of the people she claimed to care about. And if she could have undone it all, if she could have gone back to that moment when Robert Martin proposed and told Harriet to accept him, she would have done so in an instant. The spring deepened and the flowers bloomed, and Emma tried to settle into a new, quieter version of herself. She was done with matchmaking. She was done with trying to arrange other people's lives. She would focus on being a good daughter to her father, a good friend to those who would still tolerate her company, and perhaps, if she could manage it, a wiser, more thoughtful person than she had been before. It was a humbling time, a season of reflection and regret. But it was also, though Emma did not fully realize it yet, a necessary preparation for what was to come. Because the heart, when it has been humbled and softened and made aware of its own capacity for error, becomes capable of recognizing truths it could not see before. And Emma's heart, though it had been bruised and chastened by the disasters of her matchmaking attempts, was slowly becoming ready to understand something it had not understood before. Something about herself, something about love. Something about the quiet, steady presence that had always been there, that had always known her faults and cared for her anyway, that had tried to warn her and guide her even when she refused to listen. But that understanding was still ahead of her, still waiting to be discovered. For now, Emma simply moved through her days with new care, trying to do better, trying to be better, trying to learn from the mistakes that had cost her so much pride and caused so much pain. Jane Fairfax arrived in Highbury in late spring, and with her arrival came a complicated tangle of emotions that Emma had never quite been able to sort through. Jane was the niece of Miss Bates, the kind, talkative spinster who lived modestly in Highbury with her elderly mother. But unlike her aunt, Jane was elegant, accomplished, reserved, everything that should have made Emma admire her. And yet somehow every quality only increased the strange, uncomfortable distance that Emma felt in her presence. The truth, if Emma had been honest enough to admit it, was that Jane Fairfax made her feel inadequate. Jane played the piano better than Emma. Jane spoke better French, drew with more skill, read more extensively. Jane had endured hardships that Emma could not imagine. Orphaned young, raised by family friends, trained as a governess because she had no fortune and no prospects beyond her own accomplishments. And through it all, Jane had maintained a quiet dignity, a reservedness that suggested depths of character that Emma, comfortable and sheltered, had never been required to develop. Emma resented this, though she would not have used that word. She told herself that she found Jane too cold, too reserved, too perfect in a way that felt artificial. But underneath those justifications was the uncomfortable truth that Jane represented everything Emma was not, and it made Emma feel small in a way she did not like. Jane had been raised by Colonel and Mrs. Campbell, friends of her father who had taken her in after her parents' deaths. They had educated her, treated her kindly, and recently their daughter had married a Mr. Dixon and settled in Ireland. It was understood that Jane would soon have to take a position as a governess, a fate that everyone acknowledged was unfortunate but inevitable for a young woman of her circumstances. That she would have to work, would have to leave Highbury and enter service in some stranger's household, should have evoked Emma's sympathy. And in theory, it did. But in practice, Emma found herself less concerned with Jane's future hardships than with her own discomfort in Jane's presence. She is to stay with the Bateses for several months, Mrs. Weston told Emma one afternoon as they took tea together at Randall's. I hope you will make an effort to befriend her, Emma. She must be lonely with so much uncertainty in her future. I am always civil to Jane, Emma said, though she knew that civility was not the same as warmth. You are civil, yes, Mrs. Weston said gently, but you are not kind, and Jane deserves kindness, Emma. She has had a difficult life. Emma felt the rebuke, though Mrs. Weston's tone was gentle. She knew she should make more effort with Jane, should reach out with genuine friendship. But something in Emma resisted. It was easier to keep Jane at a distance, to offer polite greetings and nothing more, than to risk the comparison that closer acquaintance might invite. And so when Jane came to visit the Bateses, and Emma encountered her in Highbury, she was polite but cold, correct but distant. Jane, for her part, seemed equally reserved, equally unwilling to bridge the gap between them. They circled each other with careful courtesy, two young women who should have been friends, but who had somehow, through Emma's pride and Jane's reticence, become almost strangers. Miss Bates, dear talkative Miss Bates, tried her best to bring them together. She spoke endlessly of Jane's accomplishments, of her goodness, of her beauty. Jane played for us last evening, she would say, her eyes shining with pride. Such music, Miss Woodhouse, you have never heard anything like it. She is so accomplished, so talented. We are so fortunate to have her with us, even if it is only for a short time before she must go into service. But I must not think of that, it makes me too sad. And Emma would smile and nod and say all the right things, while inside she felt that uncomfortable mix of guilt and resentment that Jane's presence always seemed to evoke. But with Jane came also a mystery, and mysteries intrigued Emma in spite of herself. There were whispers about Jane and Mr. Dixon, the man who had married Miss Campbell, Colonel Campbell's daughter. It was said that Mr. Dixon had been particularly attentive to Jane, that he had once saved her from falling overboard during a boating excursion, that his attention to her had been marked enough to cause comment. Emma, starved for something interesting in the quiet monotony of Highbury life, latched onto this whisper with more enthusiasm than was kind. She speculated about whether Jane had perhaps been in love with Mr. Dixon, whether her presence in Ireland had become awkward after his marriage to her friend. whether that was the real reason she had returned to Highbury rather than staying with the Campbells. It was unkind speculation, and Emma knew it. But it gave her something to think about other than her own recent failures, and it made Jane seem less perfect, less intimidatingly composed. If Jane had suffered from unrequited love, if she carried a secret heartbreak, then she was human after all, vulnerable and flawed like everyone else. Mr. Knightley, observing Emma's coolness toward Jane, challenged her about it one evening at Hartfield. "You are not as warm to Jane Fairfax as you should be," he said. "She is an admirable young woman, and she is in a difficult position. You could make her time in Highbury much more pleasant if you chose to befriend her." "Why should I?" Emma said, more sharply than she intended. "We have nothing in common." "You have a great deal in common," Mr. Knightley said. "You are both intelligent, both accomplished, both young women of sense. The difference is that Jane has had to work for everything she has achieved, while you have had everything given to you." The words stung because they were true. Emma looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "She is very reserved," she said. "It is difficult to be warm to someone who gives you nothing in return." "Perhaps she is reserved because you have given her no reason to be otherwise," Mr. Knightley suggested. "Perhaps if you approached her with genuine kindness rather than cool politeness, she might respond in kind." Emma said nothing. She knew he was right, but she could not quite bring herself to admit it. The thought of reaching out to Jane, of risking rejection or worse, of inviting the closer comparison that friendship would inevitably bring, was more than Emma's pride could bear. And so the distance between Emma and Jane remained, a careful, courteous distance that bothered everyone who observed it, but which neither young woman seemed willing or able to bridge. Jane spent her days at the Bateses' small, uncomfortable home, practicing on their inferior piano, enduring her aunt's well-meaning but exhausting chatter, preparing herself for the future of servitude that awaited her. And Emma remained at Hartfield, comfortable and safe, guarded against the vulnerability that genuine friendship requires. It was not Emma's finest season. She was learning, slowly and painfully, to see her own faults. But some lessons take longer than others, and the lesson of how to extend genuine warmth to someone who made her feel inadequate was one that Emma had not yet mastered. Still, the presence of Jane Fairfax in Highbury added something to the social landscape, a complexity and mystery that had been absent before. And though Emma did not know it yet, Jane would play a significant role in the revelations and self-discoveries that were still to come. For now, she was simply another thread in the complicated tapestry of Highbury life, another person whose secrets and sorrows were hidden beneath the surface of polite society. The spring advanced, and the days grew longer, and Emma watched Jane from a distance, too proud to reach out, too curious to look away entirely. And Jane, carrying her own burdens, her own secrets, remained as reserved and composed as ever, giving nothing away, revealing nothing of the complicated truths that lay beneath her perfect, untouchable surface. If Emma had known what those secrets were, if she had understood the real reason for Jane's reserve, perhaps she would have looked at her with more sympathy, more understanding. But for now, Jane remained a mystery, a source of discomfort and speculation, a reminder of all the things that Emma was not and perhaps feared she could never be. And so they circled each other, two young women with so much they could have shared, so much they could have understood in each other, kept apart by pride and circumstance, and the foolish, unnecessary walls that people build when they are afraid of being known. Frank Churchill had been expected in Highbury for so long that his actual arrival felt almost unreal. He was Mr. Weston's son from his first marriage, raised by his wealthy aunt and uncle who had taken him in after his mother's death and given him their name, their fortune, and their expectations. For years, Mr. Weston had spoken of Frank's visits that never quite materialized, always delayed by some obligation to his aunt or some demand from his uncle. Highbury had learned to regard Frank Churchill as a sort of myth, a person more talked about than seen. But now, finally, he had come, and the whole of Highbury was buzzing with curiosity and speculation about what sort of man he would prove to be. Emma met him for the first time at Randall's, at a dinner arranged by Mrs. Weston to introduce her stepson to Highbury society. Emma had been skeptical about Frank Churchill, prepared to find him disappointing after so much anticipation. But the man who greeted her with easy charm and a warm smile was not disappointing at all. He was handsome, well-dressed, and possessed of that particular kind of confidence that comes from having been raised with every advantage. He was, in short, exactly the sort of person Emma had imagined he would be. "Miss Woodhouse," he said, taking her hand with just the right amount of warmth, "I have heard so much about you. My father speaks of you with such admiration, and I can see already that his praise was not exaggerated." Emma felt herself warming to him despite her earlier skepticism. There was something engaging about Frank Churchill, something lively and bright that made conversation with him feel effortless. He asked intelligent questions about Highbury, seemed genuinely interested in the people and places his father described, and treated Emma with a flattering degree of attention that she found pleasant after the awkwardness of recent months. They talked easily that evening, discovering shared opinions on books and music, laughing at the same observations about the people around them. Frank had the gift of making whoever he spoke to feel as though they were the most interesting person in the room, and Emma, still nursing wounded pride from the Mr. Elton disaster, found this attention balm for her bruised confidence. Mr. Weston watched them with obvious delight, pleased to see his beloved son and his dear friend's daughter getting along so well. Mrs. Weston, more observant and perhaps more cautious, watched with a thoughtful expression that suggested she was not entirely sure what to make of Frank's marked attention to Emma. Over the following days, Frank became a regular presence in Highbury. He called at Hartfield, where he charmed Mr. Woodhouse with his considerate manners and made Emma laugh with his clever observations. He seemed to be everywhere, at gatherings, at dinners, always ready with a compliment or a witty remark, always finding reasons to be where Emma was. And Emma, flattered and intrigued, began to wonder if perhaps something more than friendship was developing between them. Frank was eligible, attractive, and seemed genuinely interested in her. After the humiliation of Mr. Elton's misdirected proposal, it was pleasant to think that someone appropriate might actually care for her. But beneath the surface of Frank's charm, there were moments of strangeness that Emma noticed but could not quite interpret. He seemed oddly interested in Jane Fairfax, asking questions about her, seeking her out at gatherings, yet treating her with a sort of teasing familiarity that bordered on rudeness. When Jane received an expensive pianoforte as a gift from an anonymous benefactor, presumed by many to be from the Campbells or perhaps Mr. Dixon, Frank seemed strangely interested in the whole affair, speculating about the sender with an intensity that seemed excessive. "It must be from Mr. Dixon," he said one day as he and Emma walked through Highbury. "Who else would send such a gift? Perhaps he has feelings for her that he cannot openly acknowledge now that he is married to her friend." Emma, who had harbored similar suspicions, found herself agreeing. It was the kind of romantic mystery that appealed to her imagination. It would explain why she left Ireland so suddenly, she said. Perhaps the situation became too difficult. Or perhaps, Frank said with a mischievous smile, she left to escape feelings she should not have. Poor Jane Fairfax, carrying a secret heartbreak. It makes her seem more human, doesn't it? Emma felt a small pang of guilt at how readily she participated in this speculation. It was unkind to gossip about Jane's private sorrows, real or imagined. But Frank's company made it easy to forget such scruples, and Emma found herself caught up in the pleasure of having someone to share confidences with, someone who seemed to understand her thoughts before she even spoke them. Mr. Knightley, observing Frank Churchill's presence in Highbury, was less impressed. He found Frank too smooth, too eager to please, too ready with compliments that seemed calculated rather than genuine. When Emma mentioned how charming she found Frank, Mr. Knightley's response was cool. "He is agreeable enough," he said, "but there is something studied about his manners. I do not entirely trust a man who works so hard to be liked by everyone." "You are too severe," Emma protested. "Frank is simply well-mannered and sociable. Those are virtues, not faults." "Perhaps," Mr. Knightley said, "but I would caution you against reading too much into his attentions, Emma. He strikes me as a man who enjoys the game of flirtation, but may not have serious intentions behind it." Emma felt irritation rise in her chest. Mr. Knightley was always so quick to criticize, so ready to point out potential problems. Could he not simply let her enjoy Frank's company without casting doubt on his character? "I think you are prejudiced against him because he is everything you are not," Emma said, more sharply than she intended. "He is lively and charming, and you find that suspicious because you yourself are so serious and reserved. Mr. Knightley raised an eyebrow but did not take the bait. Perhaps, he said mildly, time will tell which of us has judged him more accurately. But Emma was not interested in Mr. Knightley's warnings. She was enjoying Frank's attention too much to question it. After the loneliness of the winter, after the embarrassment of the Mr. Elton affair, it was delightful to have someone new in Highbury, someone whose company made her laugh, whose presence made social gatherings more interesting. She found herself looking forward to seeing Frank, arranging her days around the possibility of encountering him, dressing with more care when she knew he might call at Hartfield. She did not precisely think she was in love with him, but she enjoyed the feeling of being courted, of being the object of someone's marked attention. It was flattering, and Emma, for all her growing self-awareness, was still young enough to be susceptible to flattery. Frank, for his part, seemed equally pleased with Emma's company. He sought her out at every opportunity, deferred to her opinions, brought her small gifts, sheet music, books he thought she would enjoy. He suggested outings and excursions, always ensuring that Emma would be included, always making her feel as though her presence was essential to his enjoyment. Mrs. Weston watched all this with a mixture of hope and concern. She wanted Emma to be happy, wanted her stepson to settle well in life. But she could not quite shake the feeling that something about Frank's courtship of Emma was not entirely straightforward, that there were layers to his behavior that she did not understand. And indeed, there were mysteries surrounding Frank Churchill that no one in Highbury fully understood. His frequent trips away to visit his aunt, his odd interest in Jane Fairfax, his seemingly contradictory behavior, attentive to Emma one moment, distracted and preoccupied the next, all of it suggested something beneath the surface that was not yet visible. But for now, Emma was content to enjoy Frank's company without questioning it too deeply. She had been burned by her own certainty before, had learned the hard way that she did not understand people as well as she thought. And so she allowed herself to simply experience what was happening without trying to shape it or control it or interpret it into something it might not be. The spring deepened into early summer, and Frank's presence in Highbury became a fixture of daily life. People began to wonder, to speculate, to imagine what might come of his obvious preference for Emma Woodhouse. Mr. Weston beamed with satisfaction whenever he saw them together. Mrs. Weston maintained her thoughtful, slightly worried expression. Mr. Knightley kept his distance, observing but not commenting further on what he saw. And Emma, at the center of it all, felt a lightness she had not experienced in months. Whatever happened, whatever Frank Churchill's intentions truly were, she was grateful for this spring season of pleasant company and easy laughter. After the hard lessons of winter, she had earned a little lightness, a little pleasure. Or so she told herself, not yet knowing that the mysteries surrounding Frank Churchill would soon unravel in ways she could never have anticipated, that the truth hiding beneath his charming exterior would shake Highbury society and force Emma to confront yet another uncomfortable truth about her own understanding of the human heart. Summer settled over Highbury like a warm blanket, bringing with it longer days, golden light, and opportunities for the kind of social gatherings that made village life pleasant. It was during these warm, languid weeks that the truth about Frank Churchill and about Jane Fairfax began to show itself in small, strange moments that Emma noticed but did not yet understand. The day at Donwell Abbey was one of Mr. Knightley's rare ventures into entertaining on a larger scale. He had invited a select group to spend the day at his estate, to walk the grounds, pick strawberries in the gardens, and enjoy a simple outdoor meal. It should have been a perfect, uncomplicated pleasure, the kind of gathering that Highbury society excelled at. But there was a tension in the air that day, a strangeness that Emma could feel but could not identify. Frank Churchill had arrived late, looking flushed and irritable, so unlike his usual composed self that Emma had immediately noticed. When she asked if he was well, he had brushed off her concern with a forced smile and a vague comment about the heat. But his mood remained off throughout the afternoon, his charm strained, his attention distracted. And then there was Jane Fairfax, who had arrived earlier and seemed determined to keep to herself, walking alone in the gardens, declining offers of company with polite but firm refusals. Emma had watched her from a distance, noting the pallor of her face, the tension in her shoulders. Something was troubling Jane deeply, but Emma could not guess what it might be. It was Mr. Knightley who drew Emma's attention to the strawberry beds, encouraging her to pick some of the ripe fruit. They walked together through the orderly rows, the sun warm on their shoulders, the scent of strawberries sweet in the air. It was a peaceful moment, and Emma felt grateful for Mr. Knightley's steady, uncomplicated presence. "You have made Donwell beautiful," Emma said, looking around at the well-tended gardens, the ancient house standing solid and handsome behind them. "It is my responsibility," Mr. Knightley said simply, "and my home. I am glad you find it pleasant." They talked of easy things, the harvest, the village, the small concerns of daily life. It was comfortable, this friendship they had maintained through all the complications of recent months. Mr. Knightley had been right about so much, about Mr. Elton, about Emma's matchmaking, about the dangers of meddling. Emma had learned to value his judgment, even when it stung her pride to admit he had been correct. But the peace of the strawberry picking was interrupted when Frank Churchill appeared, his expression strained. "We should be getting ready to leave for Box Hill," he said abruptly. "It is getting late." Emma had almost forgotten about the planned excursion to Box Hill the following day, a large party outing that had been Frank's idea. But Frank seemed agitated about it now, insistent in a way that seemed excessive. Mr. Knightley watched him with a thoughtful expression, but said nothing, and the moment passed. Later, as the party dispersed, Emma saw Frank speaking intently with Jane Fairfax near the edge of the garden. They stood close together, their voices too low to hear, but there was something about their posture, about the intensity of their exchange, that suggested this was not the first such conversation they had had. And when they parted, Jane looked even more distressed than before, while Frank seemed almost angry. It troubled Emma, though she could not say exactly why. There was a mystery here, something happening beneath the surface of Highbury society that she could not see. Frank's attention to her, which had seemed so straightforward, now felt complicated in ways she did not understand. And Jane's reserve, which Emma had always attributed to coldness or pride, now seemed more like the desperate composure of someone carrying a burden too heavy to share. But Emma pushed these observations aside. The Box Hill excursion was the next day, and she was determined to enjoy it, to not read too much into every strange interaction. Perhaps she was seeing patterns where there were none, interpreting ordinary moments as significant because she had been wrong so many times before. Perhaps she was simply being overly cautious, overly analytical, when she should simply allow things to unfold naturally. The day of the Box Hill excursion dawned bright and warm, perfect weather for an outdoor adventure. The party was large: Emma, Harriet, Frank Churchill, Jane Fairfax, Miss Bates, Mrs. Elton, Mr. Weston, and several others. They rode out to Box Hill in high spirits, the promise of a pleasant day ahead of them. But from the beginning, something felt wrong. The party seemed to fragment into small, isolated groups rather than mingling as one convivial whole. Mrs. Elton held court with a few loyal followers, talking endlessly of Maple Grove and offering unwanted advice to everyone. Jane Fairfax walked apart, her face pale and set. Mr. Knightley was quiet, observing more than participating. And Frank Churchill, who had organized the whole excursion, seemed determined to create entertainment through a kind of forced, feverish energy that was more exhausting than enjoyable. He attached himself to Emma, flirting with an intensity that bordered on inappropriate, making comments that were just a shade too familiar, too pointed. Emma, caught up in the attention, responded in kind, playing along with Frank's game without quite understanding what the game was or why it was being played. And then came the moment that would haunt Emma for weeks afterward. Frank, in his role as master of ceremonies, declared that everyone must say something clever to amuse Miss Woodhouse. "She demands it," he said with a theatrical bow. "Something very clever, or two moderately clever things, or three very dull things indeed." It was meant as a joke, a silly parlor game to pass the time. But Miss Bates, dear well-meaning Miss Bates, took it literally. "Oh dear," she said with a nervous laugh. "I shall be sure to say three very dull things, for I am always saying dull things. You will have no difficulty meeting your quota with me." And Emma, without thinking, without considering how her words would land, said with a small, cutting smile, "Ah, but you may find it difficult to limit yourself to only three." The silence that followed was terrible. Emma saw the moment her words registered, saw the hurt flash across Miss Bates's kind face, saw her smile falter and then freeze in place. Around them, the others shifted uncomfortably, pretending not to have heard, trying to move past the moment. But the damage was done. Mr. Knightley, standing a short distance away, looked at Emma with an expression she had never seen before, disappointment so profound it was almost anger. And Emma, her own laughter dying in her throat, realized with horrible clarity what she had just done. Miss Bates was poor, was unmarried, was dependent on the kindness of neighbors for her livelihood and social standing. She talked too much, yes, but she did so out of anxiety and a desperate desire to please, to contribute, to be valued despite having so little to offer. And Emma, blessed with every advantage, secure in her position and her wealth, had just publicly humiliated a woman who had never done anything but treat Emma with kindness and respect. The rest of the Box Hill excursion passed in a blur. Emma tried to apologize, tried to smooth over the moment, but Miss Bates would not meet her eyes, and the party had fractured beyond repair. They returned to Highbury in scattered, uncomfortable groups, the promise of the day's pleasure broken beyond mending. Emma rode home in miserable silence, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. What had she been thinking? How could she have been so cruel? This was not who she wanted to be, not the person she had been trying to become after the lessons of the previous months. And yet, in one thoughtless moment, she had revealed that she had not changed as much as she thought, that her pride and her careless tongue could still do real harm. That evening, as Emma sat alone in her room, there was a knock at the door. Mr. Knightley had come to speak with her, and from the set of his shoulders, Emma knew this would not be a pleasant conversation. "Emma," he said without preamble, "I must speak to you about what happened today at Box Hill." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "I know," she said quietly, "I know it was wrong. I was cruel and thoughtless, and you were more than thoughtless," Mr. Knightley interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You were unkind to a woman who is vulnerable, who depends on the good opinion of her neighbors, who has never done anything to deserve your mockery." Miss Bates felt that insult, Emma. She felt it deeply. "I know," Emma whispered, the tears spilling over now. "I know, and I am so ashamed. I do not know what came over me. I did not mean I was not thinking. That is precisely the problem," Mr. Knightley said. "You were not thinking of anyone but yourself and your own amusement. Emma, you have so many advantages, so many blessings. But with those advantages comes a responsibility to be kind, especially to those who have less than you do. Miss Bates has lived a hard life, and she faces a harder future. The least she deserves is respect from those more fortunate than herself." Emma could not speak. She simply wept, knowing that every word Mr. Knightley spoke was true, that she had fallen short not just of good manners, but of basic human decency. And the worst part was that she had no excuse, no justification. She had simply been careless with someone else's feelings because it had amused her in the moment. Mr. Knightley's voice softened. "Emma, I know you have a good heart. I have seen your kindness, your generosity. This is not who you truly are, but you must be more careful, more thoughtful. You cannot simply say whatever comes into your head without considering the impact of your words." Emma nodded, unable to look at him, unable to bear the disappointment in his voice. When he left, she remained sitting in the gathering darkness, feeling the full weight of what she had done, what she had become in that thoughtless moment at Box Hill. Tomorrow, she would apologize to Miss Bates. She would do whatever she could to make amends. But tonight, she simply sat with her shame, letting it teach her what it needed to teach, that growing up meant more than learning from grand failures. It meant watching every word, every action, every casual cruelty, and choosing again and again to be better than her first impulse. Emma barely slept that night. She lay in the darkness of her room, replaying the events of Box Hill over and over in her mind, the casual cruelty of her words, the hurt on Miss Bates's face, the disappointment in Mr. Knightley's eyes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw it all again, felt the shame wash over her in fresh waves. She had thought she was learning, thought she was becoming wiser, more thoughtful. But the truth was that she had only been humbled in her matchmaking ambitions. She had not truly changed the fundamental arrogance that made her believe she could say anything, do anything, without real consequences. She had still thought of herself as somehow above the ordinary rules of kindness, still assumed that her cleverness excused her cruelty. And now she was paying the price for that arrogance, lying awake in the dark, sick with shame at what she had become. Morning came reluctantly, gray light seeping through the curtains. Emma rose and dressed with hands that trembled slightly. She had made a decision during the long, sleepless night. She would go to Miss Bates this morning, first thing, and apologize properly. Not with excuses or justifications, but with genuine, humble contrition. It would be difficult. Miss Bates's kindness would make it somehow worse, would make Emma's cruelty stand out in even sharper relief. But it had to be done. The walk to the Bateses' modest home took only a few minutes, but each step felt heavy with dread. Emma rehearsed what she would say, discarding phrases that sounded too self-serving, too focused on her own feelings rather than on the harm she had caused. By the time she reached the door, her heart was pounding. Miss Bates opened the door herself, her face breaking into its usual welcoming smile before a shadow of uncertainty crossed it. She had not expected Emma, and the memory of Box Hill was fresh enough to make her hesitate. "Miss Woodhouse," she said, her voice a little less effusive than usual. "What a surprise. Do come in. Mother will be so pleased to see you. We were just having our breakfast. Such as it is, of course, nothing fancy, just a bit of toast and tea, but you are always welcome." "Miss Bates," Emma interrupted gently, her voice thick with emotion. "I have come to apologize. For yesterday, for what I said at Box Hill. It was unkind and thoughtless and wrong, and I am deeply, truly sorry." Miss Bates's hands fluttered to her mouth, and her eyes, those kind, anxious eyes, filled with tears. "Oh, Miss Woodhouse, you are too good to come all this way. It was nothing, truly. I am sure you meant nothing by it." "I meant it when I said it," Emma said, forcing herself to be honest. "I thought I was being clever, and I did not stop to think about how my words would hurt you. But that is no excuse. You have always been kind to me, and I repaid that kindness with cruelty. I am ashamed of myself, and I hope you can forgive me." For a moment Miss Bates could not speak. She simply stood there, tears streaming down her face, her hands still pressed to her mouth. And then she reached out and took Emma's hand, squeezing it with a warmth that made Emma's own tears spill over. "Of course I forgive you," Miss Bates said, her voice breaking. "Of course, my dear Miss Woodhouse. You have such a good heart, and I know you would never intentionally hurt anyone. You are forgiven, completely and absolutely. Think nothing more of it." But Emma could not think nothing of it. Even as Miss Bates ushered her inside, insisting she sit and have tea, asking after Mr. Woodhouse, and chattering about Jane and the weather and a dozen other subjects in her usual rambling way, Emma felt the weight of what had happened. Miss Bates had forgiven her immediately, without hesitation, with a generosity that Emma did not deserve. And that generosity only made Emma more aware of how much she had to learn about being truly kind, truly thoughtful, truly good. Jane Fairfax appeared briefly during the visit, looking pale and drawn. She acknowledged Emma with a cool nod, but did not join the conversation. There was something final about her reserve, as though she had retreated behind walls that no one would be allowed to penetrate. Emma felt a pang of concern, but Jane disappeared up the stairs before Emma could speak to her. "Jane is not well," Miss Bates confided in a whisper. "She has been so troubled lately, and I do not know what to do for her. She speaks of taking a governess position sooner than planned, which distresses me so much. But I must not burden you with our troubles, Miss Woodhouse, when you have been so kind as to visit." Emma left the Bateses' home feeling only slightly relieved. She had apologized, and she had been forgiven. But the forgiveness did not erase what she had done, did not undo the casual harm she had inflicted. It was a lesson, and Emma vowed to carry it with her, to remember this feeling before she ever let careless words slip from her tongue again. As she walked back to Hartfield, she encountered Mr. Knightley on horseback. He drew up beside her, his expression still serious but no longer quite so disappointed as it had been the night before. "Emma," he said quietly, "I heard you went to see Miss Bates this morning." "I did," Emma said. "I apologized, as I should have done immediately yesterday." "And was she gracious?" "She was more than gracious," Emma said, her throat tight. "She forgave me completely, which somehow makes me feel worse rather than better." Mr. Knightley dismounted and walked beside her, leading his horse. "That is Miss Bates's nature," he said. "She does not know how to hold a grudge. But Emma, the fact that you feel worse about her forgiveness means you truly understand what you did. That is important. That is growth." Emma looked at him, grateful for his words but still ashamed. "I do not want to be the kind of person who hurts people carelessly," she said. I thought I was learning, thought I was becoming better after the disaster with Mr. Elton. But clearly I have further to go than I realized. We all have further to go, Mr. Knightley said gently. The important thing is that you are willing to look at yourself honestly, to admit when you are wrong, to make amends. Many people never learn that, Emma. I believe you are learning it. They walked in silence for a moment, and Emma felt some of the crushing weight of shame begin to lift. Not entirely. She would carry the memory of Box Hill with her for a long time, but enough that she could breathe a little easier. Mr. Knightley, she said hesitantly, I want to thank you for speaking to me as you did last night. It was hard to hear, but it was necessary. I needed someone to tell me the truth, even when the truth was painful. I will always tell you the truth, Emma, Mr. Knightley said, even when it is uncomfortable for both of us. That is what friendship requires. Friendship. The word settled into Emma's chest with a warmth she did not quite understand. Mr. Knightley was her friend, her oldest and most reliable friend. He had known her since she was a child, had watched her grow up, had corrected her when she needed correcting and praised her when she deserved praise. He was as much a part of Hartfield, of her life, as the house itself. And standing there in the summer morning, walking beside him toward home, Emma felt a rush of gratitude so profound it almost took her breath away. Whatever mistakes she made, whatever foolishness she fell into, Mr. Knightley would be there to help her see clearly again. That was a comfort, a blessing, a gift she had not properly appreciated until now. They reached Hartfield, and Mr. Knightley prepared to continue on to Donwell. I may be away for a few days, he said, business in London, but I will return soon. I will miss your company, Emma said, surprised by how much she meant it. Mr. Knightley smiled, that rare, warm smile that made his whole face soften. And I will miss yours, Emma. But I trust you will not get into too much trouble in my absence. He rode away, and Emma stood watching him go, feeling an odd sense of loss at the sight of him disappearing down the lane. It was strange, this feeling. She had never particularly minded when Mr. Knightley went to London before. But today, after everything that had happened, the thought of not seeing him for several days left her feeling unexpectedly bereft. She shook off the feeling and went inside, where her father was waiting for her with gentle concern and a dozen anxious questions about where she had been. Emma reassured him, settled him with his tea and his newspaper, and tried to turn her thoughts to other things. But the events of Box Hill had set something in motion, had shifted something in the careful balance of Highbury society. And in the days that followed, as Mr. Knightley traveled to London and Emma tried to settle back into her ordinary routines, she began to sense that change was coming, that the comfortable certainties of her life were about to be challenged in ways she could not yet imagine. Jane Fairfax grew more withdrawn, more pale, more clearly troubled. Frank Churchill's visits became sporadic and strange. And Emma, watching it all with newly careful eyes, began to realize that there were mysteries in Highbury that she had not even begun to understand, secrets that would soon come to light and force everyone to reconsider what they thought they knew. The days after Box Hill felt different, as though Emma were moving through a world that had subtly shifted while she was not paying attention. She went through her usual routines, caring for her father, managing the household, receiving visitors at Hartfield, but everything felt muted, tinged with the awareness of her own fallibility that she could no longer ignore. She thought often about what Mr. Knightley had said, about her responsibilities to those less fortunate, about the need to think before speaking, to consider the impact of her words on vulnerable hearts. It was a harder lesson than any she had learned before, because it was not about a single dramatic failure, but about the small, daily choices that revealed character. It was about being good not just in grand gestures, but in the ordinary moments when no one was watching and keeping score. Emma found herself observing Miss Bates with new eyes whenever they met in Highbury. She saw the threadbare edges of Miss Bates's dress, the careful way she made one bonnet last multiple seasons, the anxiety in her eyes when she spoke about their financial situation. She saw how Miss Bates worked so hard to be cheerful, to contribute to conversations, to make herself useful and valued despite having so little to offer in a world that measured worth by fortune and status. And Emma, who had mocked that anxious cheerfulness, who had made a joke of Miss Bates's efforts to please, felt the weight of shame settle deeper into her chest. This was what Mr. Knightley had meant. This was the responsibility that came with privilege, to use it gently, to protect rather than to wound, to lift up rather than to mock. She made a point of calling on the Bateses more often, of listening with real attention to Miss Bates's rambling stories, of asking after Mrs. Bates's health with genuine concern. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was what Emma could do to make amends, to be the kind of person she wanted to become rather than the thoughtless girl she had been. Jane Fairfax remained a mystery, growing paler and more withdrawn with each passing day. Emma learned from Miss Bates that Jane had written to an agency about governess positions, that she was determined to secure employment as soon as possible despite her aunt's distress at the thought of losing her. "She will not listen to reason," Miss Bates confided one afternoon, her hands twisting anxiously in her lap. "I tell her there is no rush, that she should stay with us as long as she likes, but she insists she must go soon. And to think of dear Jane in some stranger's household, subject to their whims, teaching children who may not appreciate her. It breaks my heart, Miss Woodhouse, truly breaks it." Emma felt a pang of sympathy, both for Miss Bates's distress and for Jane's grim determination to face a future that held so little joy. Whatever Emma's complicated feelings about Jane Fairfax, she would not wish the life of a governess on anyone. It was a position that offered neither independence nor security, that placed educated women in a kind of limbo, too genteel to be servants, too poor to be true equals with their employers. "Perhaps something will change," Emma said gently, though she did not know what that something might be. "Perhaps an opportunity will arise that will spare her from that fate." But Miss Bates only shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "I pray for it every night, Miss Woodhouse, but Jane is so determined, so resolved. I fear she has made up her mind, and once Jane decides something, she does not change course." The conversation left Emma unsettled. There was something about Jane's determination to leave Highbury, about the timing of it, that suggested more than just practical necessity. It felt like flight, like escape from something unbearable. But what, and why now? Emma thought about the expensive pianoforte that had arrived for Jane, the gift that everyone assumed was from the Campbells or perhaps Mr. Dixon. She thought about Frank Churchill's odd interest in Jane, his teasing familiarity that bordered on rudeness. She thought about the way Jane had looked at the Donwell Abbey outing, pale, strained, desperately unhappy. And slowly, pieces began to shift in Emma's mind. Patterns began to emerge from what had seemed like random observations. Frank's attention to Emma had always felt slightly performative, as though he were playing a role rather than expressing genuine feeling. Jane's reserve toward Frank had sometimes seemed less like coldness and more like the careful distance of someone trying to maintain composure. The pianoforte, arriving anonymously at exactly the time when Frank had been in London. Emma tried to push the speculation away. She had been wrong so many times before, had read so much into situations that turned out to be nothing like what she imagined. She did not trust her own judgment anymore, not about matters of the heart. And yet, the suspicion lingered, growing stronger with each new observation. Mr. Knightley remained in London, his absence stretching longer than Emma had expected. She found herself missing him with a keenness that surprised her. She missed his steady presence, his honest counsel, the way he challenged her to be better than her first impulses. She missed the comfort of knowing that someone in her life would always tell her the truth, even when the truth was difficult to hear. And without him there to ground her, Emma felt unmoored, uncertain, aware of how much she had come to rely on his judgment to balance her own. Hartfield felt quieter without his frequent visits. Her days felt longer without the anticipation of his arrival. It was a strange, uncomfortable feeling, this sense of incompleteness when he was not there. One evening, as Emma sat with her father in the drawing room, Mr. Weston arrived with news that would change everything. Frank Churchill had written to his father with an urgent message. He had something important to communicate, something that could no longer be kept secret, something that would shock Highbury society. "He is coming to Randall's tomorrow," Mr. Weston said, his expression troubled. "And he asks that you and Mr. Woodhouse join us, Emma, if you are willing. He says there is something he must explain, must reveal to everyone who has been affected by his decisions." Emma's heart began to pound. What decisions? What has Frank done? But Mr. Weston would not say more. He looked uncomfortable, even ashamed, as though whatever Frank had to reveal reflected poorly on the entire Weston family. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "All will be explained tomorrow. I very much hope, that you will be able to forgive what you are about to learn." After he left, Emma sat in the darkness of the drawing room, her mind racing. Frank Churchill had a secret, something serious enough to require formal confession, to need forgiveness from those he had misled. And Emma, with a sinking certainty, thought she knew what that secret might be. Jane Fairfax, Frank Churchill. The pianoforte, the strange, strained interactions between them. Frank's performative flirtation with Emma, which had always felt slightly hollow, slightly false. Jane's determination to leave Highbury, to escape into the anonymity of governess work. It all fit together if Emma was reading the signs correctly. They were engaged, secretly engaged. And they had been hiding it all this time, letting everyone in Highbury believe different things, create different expectations, while they carried on their hidden relationship under the noses of everyone who thought they knew them. And Emma had been part of that deception, had been used as a screen, a distraction. Frank's attentions to her had been a performance designed to hide his true feelings for Jane. Every moment of flirtation, every seeming preference, had been a calculated misdirection. Emma felt a rush of emotions, anger at being used, embarrassment at having been fooled, concern for Jane, who must have endured the pain of watching Frank pay court to another woman, confusion about why such a secret had been necessary at all. But underneath all of it was a strange, unexpected relief. Because if Emma was right, if Frank and Jane were secretly engaged, then Emma was free. Free of the expectations that had been building around her supposed romance with Frank, free of the half-formed imaginings about what might develop between them. And more than that, she was free to acknowledge what she had been slowly, unconsciously realizing over these past weeks. She did not love Frank Churchill. She had never loved him. And the attention he had paid her, which she had once found so flattering, now felt meaningless, a performance that had nothing to do with her real self, her real worth. The truth would come tomorrow. And Emma, sitting in the quiet of Hartfield, prepared herself to face it with whatever grace and humility she had managed to learn from the hard lessons of recent months. She had been wrong before. She had misread situations, misjudged people, hurt those who deserved better from her. But she was trying to be different now, trying to be wiser, kinder, more careful with the hearts and feelings of others. Tomorrow would bring revelations. And Emma, for perhaps the first time in her comfortable life, was ready to listen rather than to assume, to learn rather than to judge, to accept truth even when it contradicted everything she had believed. The next day brought the truth, delivered in a letter from Frank Churchill to Mrs. Weston that explained everything Emma had guessed and much that she had not. Emma read it in Mrs. Weston's drawing room at Randall's, her emotions shifting from paragraph to paragraph as the full scope of Frank's deception became clear. He and Jane Fairfax had been secretly engaged since the previous autumn, engaged before he had ever come to Highbury, before he had ever paid court to Emma, before any of the complicated, painful events of recent months. The engagement had been kept secret because Frank's aunt, Mrs. Churchill, would never have approved the match. Jane had no fortune, no connections, nothing that would recommend her to the proud, demanding woman who controlled Frank's inheritance and his future. And so they had hidden it, had carried on a secret correspondence, had met and parted in stolen moments, all while letting Highbury believe that Frank was free, that Jane was unattached, that anything might develop between Frank and Emma. It was a deception born of necessity, Frank insisted in his letter. A choice made to protect Jane from Mrs. Churchill's disapproval and to preserve Frank's eventual inheritance, which would allow them to marry comfortably. But necessity did not make the deception kind. Emma saw that clearly as she read Frank's lengthy justifications and explanations. He had used Emma as a screen, had flirted with her to disguise his true attachment to Jane. He had made Jane watch as he appeared to court another woman, had subjected her to the pain of seeing him smile at Emma, dance with Emma, sit beside Emma at gatherings. And he had done it all with Jane's reluctant cooperation, because they had both believed the deception was necessary. The pianoforte had been Frank's gift, sent anonymously to avoid suspicion. The strange tensions at Donwell Abbey, Frank's irritability, Jane's distress, all of it had been because they had quarreled, because Jane had grown tired of the secrecy and the pain it was causing. She had told Frank she could bear it no longer, that she would rather take a governess position and leave Highbury than continue the charade. And Frank, desperate to keep her, had nevertheless continued to flirt with Emma at Box Hill, had continued the performance even as it tore Jane apart. Emma set down the letter, her hands trembling with a complicated mix of emotions. She was angry at Frank for using her, embarrassed at how easily she had been deceived. But more than that, she felt profound sympathy for Jane Fairfax. To love someone and watch them pretend to care for another, to endure that pain in silence, to maintain composure while your heart was breaking, Emma could hardly imagine it. "I am sorry, Emma," Mrs. Weston said quietly, watching her face. "If I had known, I would never have encouraged his attentions to you. I hoped that he truly cared for you." "He did not," Emma said simply. "He never did. I was useful to him, nothing more. And I suppose I should be grateful that I never truly cared for him either. My pride is wounded, but my heart is untouched." Mrs. Weston looked relieved. "Then you are not terribly hurt?" Emma considered the question honestly. Was she hurt? Her pride certainly was. She had been made a fool of, had participated unknowingly in a deception that had caused real pain to Jane Fairfax. She had imagined, briefly, that Frank might have genuine feelings for her, and learning that it had all been performance was humiliating. But her heart was fine, because she had never loved Frank Churchill. She had enjoyed his attention, had been flattered by his preference, but she had never felt for him what she imagined love should feel like. And now, looking back on their interactions, she could see the emptiness at the center of it all. There had been nothing real there, nothing true. "I am not hurt," Emma said finally. "Not in the way you mean, but I am concerned for Jane. Where is she now? How is she bearing this?" Frank has written to her as well, begging her forgiveness, explaining that his aunt has died, and he is now free to acknowledge the engagement publicly. He wants to marry her as soon as possible, to make up for all the pain he has caused her. Mrs. Churchill was dead. The obstacle that had necessitated all the secrecy was gone, removed by death's arbitrary hand. And now Frank and Jane were free to be together openly, to acknowledge what they had hidden for so long. It should have been a happy ending, but Emma could not help thinking of the cost. The months of pain Jane had endured, the deception that had harmed not just Emma, but everyone who had been drawn into the complicated web of half-truths and misdirection. Emma went to call on Jane later that day, determined to offer her congratulations and whatever comfort she could provide. She found Jane at the Bateses' home, still pale, but with some of the terrible tension gone from her face. The relief of having the truth spoken, of no longer having to hide and pretend, was visible in every line of her body. "Miss Woodhouse," Jane said, her voice uncertain, "I do not know what to say. I am sorry you were drawn into our deception. It was never our intention to hurt you. But you did intend to deceive," Emma said gently, without accusation. "And that deception caused harm, whether you intended it or not." Jane's eyes filled with tears. "I know, I hated every moment of it. Watching Frank pay attention to you, smile at you, when She broke off, unable to continue. Emma felt her own throat tighten with sympathy. "I cannot imagine how difficult it must have been," she said, "to love someone and watch them pretend to care for another. Jane, I am so sorry for the pain you endured." "You are too generous," Jane whispered. "I do not deserve your kindness. You deserve happiness," Emma said firmly. "And if Frank can give you that, if he truly loves you, then I wish you both well. But Jane, if I may offer one piece of advice, make sure he understands the cost of what he asked you to endure. Make sure he knows that love, real love, should never require such painful sacrifices." Jane nodded, tears streaming down her face. And in that moment, something shifted between them. The reserve that had always kept them apart, the complicated resentment and inadequacy Emma had felt, the careful distance Jane had maintained. It all fell away, and what remained was simply two young women who had both been hurt by the same deception, both trying to navigate a world that offered them limited choices and demanded impossible compromises. They talked for a long while, more honestly than they had ever talked before. Jane spoke of her fears about the future, about whether she could truly trust Frank after everything that had happened. Emma spoke of her own errors in judgment, her failed matchmaking, the hard lessons she had learned about the dangers of meddling. And by the time Emma left the Bateses' home, she felt as though she had finally, truly made a friend of Jane Fairfax. But the revelation about Frank and Jane had another consequence that Emma did not anticipate. That evening, as she was sitting with her father at Hartfield, Harriet came to visit. And Harriet, sweet, trusting Harriet, had something to confess. "Miss Woodhouse," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I must tell you something. I know about Mr. Frank Churchill's engagement to Miss Fairfax, and I am very happy for them. Because you see, my affections are already engaged elsewhere." Emma felt a sudden dread. "Harriet, what do you mean?" "I am in love," Harriet said, her face glowing with shy happiness. "With the man who has shown me true kindness, true regard. The man who has—" She paused, gathering courage. "Mr. Knightley, I am in love with Mr. Knightley." The world seemed to tilt sickeningly beneath Emma's feet. Mr. Knightley. Harriet was in love with Mr. Knightley. And worse, far worse, Emma had encouraged this. She had told Harriet, after the Mr. Elton disaster, to aim higher, to not settle for less than she deserved. She had, without realizing it, planted the idea in Harriet's mind that she might aspire to someone far above her station. When, how, Emma could barely form words. "At the ball," Harriet said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "When those horrible Eltons refused to dance with me, and I was so humiliated, Mr. Knightley asked me to dance. He was so kind, so good. And then at the Donwell outing, he spoke to me with such warmth. Miss Woodhouse, I truly believe he cares for me, and with your encouragement, I dare to hope." Emma could not breathe. The room felt too small, too hot, pressing in around her. Because in that moment, with Harriet's hopeful confession ringing in her ears, Emma understood with devastating clarity what she had been too blind to see before. She loved Mr. Knightley. Not as a friend, not as a brother, but with the full, complicated, terrifying love that she had never felt for Frank Churchill, never felt for anyone. And she had no idea when it had happened, when friendship had transformed into something deeper, when his presence had become essential to her happiness, when the thought of losing him had become unbearable. And now, because of her own foolish encouragement, because of her meddling and her careless words, Harriet believed she had a chance with him. And Mr. Knightley, kind, good Mr. Knightley, might very well care for Harriet in return. Why should he not? Harriet was sweet and gentle and grateful, everything that Emma was not. And Emma had no claim on him, no right to object if he chose to marry Harriet. She had done this to herself, and the pain of it was like nothing she had ever experienced before. After Harriet left, Emma sat alone in the drawing room at Hartfield, her mind reeling from the revelation that had just shattered her comfortable world. She loved Mr. Knightley, and she had never known it, had never seen it, until the moment when Harriet's confession made the loss of him a real, terrifying possibility. How long had she loved him? Emma tried to trace it back, to find the moment when friendship had transformed into something deeper. But there was no single moment she could identify. Instead, there was a lifetime of moments. Mr. Knightley arriving at Hartfield with his steady presence, arguing with her about her faults, praising her when she deserved it, always being there when she needed him. She thought of how she had missed him during his time in London, how the days had felt longer without his visits, how she had looked forward to his return with an eagerness that she had not bothered to examine. She thought of how his good opinion mattered to her more than anyone else's, how his disappointment at Box Hill had cut deeper than any other reproach could have. She thought of the way he smiled at her, the way he knew her better than anyone else in the world, the way he made her want to be better than she was. And she understood, with painful clarity, that she had been in love with him for longer than she could say, had loved him without knowing it, without recognizing what the feeling meant. And now it was too late. Because Harriet loved him, and Emma had encouraged that love through her own careless words about not settling, about deserving the best. And Mr. Knightley, dear honorable Mr. Knightley, might very well choose Harriet. Why should he not? Emma had given him nothing but trouble and error and stubborn pride. Harriet offered sweetness, gratitude, uncomplicated affection. Emma felt tears running down her face, the kind of tears she had not cried since she was a child. She wept for her own blindness, for the years of friendship she had taken for granted, for the love she had discovered too late. She wept for the future she had lost before she even knew she wanted it, for the empty years ahead without Mr. Knightley's steady presence to anchor her life. The thought of him marrying Harriet, of seeing them together, of having to smile and congratulate them while her heart broke, it was unbearable. And yet she would have to bear it. because this was the consequence of her meddling, her pride, her refusal to see what was right in front of her until it was too late. She spent a sleepless night, her mind turning over every conversation she had ever had with Mr. Knightley, looking for signs of his feelings, trying to gauge whether he might care for her as more than a friend. But she could find nothing definite, nothing she could hold on to as proof. He was kind to her, yes. He was honest with her, yes. But he was kind and honest with everyone. That was simply who he was. And then there was the matter of his dance with Harriet at the ball, the kindness he had shown her at Donwell Abbey. Harriet had interpreted those moments as signs of deeper feeling, and Emma could not say with certainty that Harriet was wrong. Mr. Knightley was too good to humiliate Harriet publicly by refusing to dance with her. He was too kind to ignore her when she was clearly in distress. But did those actions indicate love, or simply the basic decency that characterized everything Mr. Knightley did? Emma did not know, and the not knowing was agony. The next morning, she received word that Mr. Knightley had returned from London and would be calling at Hartfield that afternoon. Emma spent the intervening hours in a state of anxious dread, changing her dress 3 times, unable to settle to any occupation, watching the clock as though she could slow the inevitable moment when she would have to see him, speak to him, pretend that her entire world had not shifted on its axis. When he finally arrived, Emma's heart pounded so hard she thought he must surely hear it. He looked travel-worn but well, his expression as steady and kind as it had always been. And looking at him, at the familiar lines of his face, the concern in his eyes as he greeted her, Emma felt her love for him settle into her chest with a weight that was both painful and precious. "Emma," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. "I hope I find you well. I came as soon as I could. I have heard about Frank Churchill's engagement to Jane Fairfax, and I wanted to ensure you were not too distressed by the revelation." "I am perfectly well," Emma said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I was surprised, of course, but my heart is untouched. I never truly cared for Frank Churchill." Mr. Knightley studied her face for a long moment, and Emma wondered what he saw there, what he could read in her expression that she was trying so hard to hide. "I am relieved to hear it," he said finally. "I have been worried these past weeks, worried that you might be hurt, that Churchill's attentions might have engaged your affections more deeply than I had hoped." "Than you had hoped," Emma repeated, her breath catching in her throat. Mr. Knightley took a step closer, his expression suddenly uncertain in a way she had never seen before. "Emma, I must speak plainly. I can no longer keep silent about what I feel. These weeks in London, knowing that Churchill was here, that he might be winning your heart, it was torture. And when I heard of his engagement, my first feeling was not sympathy for you, but profound, shameful relief that you were free of him." Emma could not speak, could barely breathe. Mr. Knightley was standing before her, looking at her with an intensity that made her knees weak, saying words she had not dared to hope she would ever hear. "I have loved you for longer than I can say," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I have watched you grow from a clever, headstrong child into a woman of intelligence and heart. I have tried to guide you, to challenge you, to help you become the best version of yourself, even when it meant risking your anger or your pride. And through it all, I have loved you when you were wrong, loved you when you were right, loved you every moment of every day." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but she could not look away from him, could not break the spell of this moment. "Mr. Knightley, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I have no right to expect your affection in return. I have been critical of you, have pointed out your faults more readily than your virtues. I am not charming like Churchill, not practiced in the art of courtship. I am simply a man who loves you more than he can express, who wants nothing more than to spend the rest of his life making you happy. Emma, if you could care for me even a fraction of what I feel for you, if there is any possibility that you might learn to love me, I am asking you to be my wife." Emma could not help it. She laughed through her tears, a sound of pure, incredulous joy. "Learn to love you, Mr. Knightley. I have loved you for so long that I cannot remember when it began. I was simply too foolish to recognize it until I thought I had lost you." The transformation in Mr. Knightley's face was like watching the sun break through clouds. His expression shifted from uncertainty to wonder to joy so profound it took Emma's breath away. "You love me," he said, as though he could not quite believe it. "Emma, you truly love me." "I love you," Emma said, and saying the words aloud made them more real, more true than anything she had ever said before. I love your honesty, your goodness, your patience with my foolishness. I love the way you challenge me, the way you know me better than anyone else. I love everything about you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Mr. Knightley closed the distance between them and took her hands in his grip warm and steady and exactly right. Then I am the happiest man alive, he said quietly. Emma, my dearest Emma, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. They stood there for a long moment, simply looking at each other, marveling at the miracle of requited love, at the joy of knowing that the feelings they had carried in secret were returned in full measure. And then Mr. Knightley drew her close, and Emma rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, feeling the rightness of being exactly where she belonged. But as the first rush of joy began to settle, Emma remembered Harriet. Sweet Harriet, who believed she was in love with Mr. Knightley, who thought she had Emma's encouragement to pursue him. Emma pulled back slightly, her expression troubled. There is something I must tell you, she said. Something that complicates this happiness, though it does not change how I feel. And so she told him about Harriet's confession, about the love Harriet believed she felt, about Emma's own role in encouraging expectations that could now never be fulfilled. Mr. Knightley listened carefully, his expression growing serious. Poor Harriet, he said when Emma finished. I had no idea she had formed such an attachment. I was simply being kind to her after the Eltons' rudeness. I never intended to raise false hopes. I know, Emma said, but I did. Through my careless encouragement, through my insistence that she aim higher, I planted the idea in her mind. And now I must tell her the truth, that you and I are engaged, that her hopes were misplaced. It will hurt her, Mr. Knightley said gently. Yes, Emma agreed, it will. But it would hurt her more to let her continue hoping for something that will never happen. And perhaps, she paused, thinking, perhaps there is still a chance for her to find real happiness if she can let go of this imagined attachment. Mr. Knightley smiled. You are thinking of Robert Martin. I am, Emma admitted. I was wrong to encourage her to refuse him. He is a good man and he truly cares for her. If there is any possibility of mending that breach, I want to try. Then we will try together, Mr. Knightley said. But Emma, you must let Harriet make her own choices. No more matchmaking, no more meddling. Simply offer her your friendship and your honest advice, and let her heart find its own way. Emma nodded, knowing he was right, grateful for his steady wisdom even now, when her own happiness was so new and overwhelming that she could barely think straight. She had so much to learn still, so many ways she needed to grow. But with Mr. Knightley beside her, guiding her, loving her, she believed she could become the woman she wanted to be. The conversation with Harriet was as difficult as Emma had feared it would be. She went to Mrs. Goddard's school the next morning, her heart heavy with the knowledge of the pain she was about to inflict. Harriet met her in the small parlor, her face bright with the hopeful innocence that made Emma's task even harder. Miss Woodhouse, Harriet said, smiling, I am so glad you have come. I wanted to speak with you about what I confessed the other day, about my feelings for Mr. Knightley. Emma took Harriet's hands in hers, squeezing them gently. Harriet, that is why I have come. There is something I must tell you, something that will be painful to hear. But I owe you honesty, after all the ways I have misled you in the past. Harriet's smile faded, replaced by uncertainty. What is it? Mr. Knightley and I are engaged to be married, Emma said gently. He declared his love for me yesterday, and I accepted him. Harriet, I am so sorry. I never knew you had formed an attachment to him. If I had known, I would have. She paused, trying to find the right words. I would have told you sooner, would have spared you this disappointment. Harriet went very still, her face pale with shock. For a long moment she said nothing, simply stared at Emma as though trying to make sense of words that did not fit together in her mind. And then, slowly, tears began to slide down her cheeks. You love him, Harriet said, her voice barely a whisper. You love Mr. Knightley. I do, Emma said. I have loved him for a very long time, though I did not realize it until recently. And he loves me, Harriet. We are to be married. But you told me, you said I should aim high, that I should not settle for less than I deserved. You encouraged me to, Harriet broke off, her expression shifting from shock to understanding to something that looked almost like anger. You encouraged me to refuse Mr. Martin. You made me believe I could aspire to someone like Mr. Elton, someone like Mr. Knightley, and all the while you wanted him for yourself. Emma felt the accusation land with the weight it deserved. "I did not know I loved him," she said quietly. "I swear to you, Harriet, I did not know. If I had, I would never have encouraged you to." She stopped, knowing that the excuse sounded hollow even to her own ears. The truth was more complicated than that. Emma had encouraged Harriet to aim high because it had flattered Emma's own sense of importance, had made her feel useful and wise. She had discouraged Harriet's attachment to Robert Martin not because it would have made Harriet unhappy, but because it had offended Emma's pride to imagine her protégé settling for a farmer. And even if Emma had not consciously known she loved Mr. Knightley, some part of her had recognized him as hers, had assumed his constancy as a given, had never seriously considered that he might belong to anyone else. "I have been a poor friend to you, Harriet," Emma said, her own tears falling now. "I have let my pride and my arrogance guide my advice to you when I should have been thinking only of your happiness. I encouraged you to refuse Robert Martin, a good man who truly loved you, because I thought you could do better. But better for whom? Not for you, Harriet, for me. For my own pride, my own sense of having elevated you." Harriet was weeping openly now, her small body shaking with the force of her sobs. And Emma, unable to offer any comfort that would not ring false, simply sat beside her and let her cry, bearing witness to the pain that Emma's meddling had caused. After a long while, Harriet's tears subsided into quiet, defeated sadness. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small and lost. "Mr. Martin will not want me now, not after I refused him so unkindly. And Mr. Knightley," she could not finish the sentence. "I do not know if Mr. Martin would accept you now," Emma said honestly. "But Harriet, if there is any chance, any possibility that he might still care for you, would you want to try? Do you think you could be happy with him if you allowed yourself to be?" Harriet was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful despite her tears. "I think," she said slowly, "that I was happier thinking about Mr. Martin than I ever was thinking about Mr. Elton or Mr. Knightley. With Mr. Martin, I felt safe. I felt liked for who I am, not for what I might be or what someone imagined me to be. But I gave that up because you told me I should, because you made me believe I deserved more." "You do deserve more," Emma said, "but not in the way I meant it. You deserve someone who truly values you, who sees you clearly and loves what they see. Mr. Martin offered you that, and I was wrong to encourage you to refuse it." "Can it be mended?" Harriet asked, her voice tentative with hope. "Is there any way to repair what I broke?" Emma thought of Mr. Knightley's friendship with Robert Martin, of the respect the two men had for each other. "I do not know," she said, "but I promise you, Harriet, I will do everything in my power to help. Not by meddling, not by arranging things as I think they should be, but by simply creating opportunities for you and Mr. Martin to encounter each other. The rest must be up to you and to him. I will not interfere with your heart again." Harriet nodded slowly, some of the devastation in her expression easing into tentative possibility. "I would like that," she said. "I would like to see him again, to speak with him. Even if he cannot forgive me, even if it is too late, I would like to try." "Then we will try," Emma said, "together. As friends should." They sat together for a while longer, talking more honestly than they had perhaps ever talked before. Emma confessed all her errors in judgment, all the ways she had prioritized her own pride over Harriet's happiness. And Harriet, with the gentle forgiveness that was her nature, accepted Emma's apology and offered tentatively to try to move forward. When Emma finally left Mrs. Goddard's school, she felt drained but also strangely lighter. She had told Harriet the truth, had confessed her own faults, had committed to helping repair the damage she had caused. It was not enough. Nothing could fully undo the pain her meddling had inflicted, but it was a start. Mr. Knightley was waiting for her at Hartfield when she returned, his expression concerned. "How did she take it?" he asked. "As well as could be expected," Emma said. "She was hurt, as she should be. But Harriet has a generous heart, and I hope, that she may be willing to forgive both of us in time." "And what of Robert Martin?" Mr. Knightley asked. Emma smiled, despite her emotional exhaustion. "I have promised to create opportunities for them to meet again, without meddling in what happens between them. Will you help me? You know Mr. Martin, you could arrange for him to be in company where Harriet will also be present." "I can do that," Mr. Knightley said. "Martin is a good man. If Harriet is willing to approach him with genuine affection rather than condescension, I believe he might be willing to give her another chance. He has not forgotten her, Emma. He asks after her whenever we speak. Emma felt a surge of hope. Perhaps it was not too late. Perhaps the damage could be repaired, the happiness restored that Emma had so carelessly disrupted. It would not be easy, and it would require Harriet to humble herself, to admit that she had been wrong to refuse him the first time. But if she could do that, if she could let go of the false pride that Emma had instilled in her, then perhaps she and Robert Martin could find their way back to each other. The weeks that followed were both the happiest and the most humbling of Emma's life. She was engaged to the man she loved, planning a future that glowed bright with promise. But she was also watching, with careful, self-imposed restraint, as Harriet and Robert Martin slowly, tentatively found their way back to understanding. Mr. Knightley arranged a dinner at Donwell Abbey, inviting both Harriet and Robert Martin among the guests. Emma watched as they greeted each other with shy awkwardness, as they spoke briefly and carefully, testing the waters of a connection that had been broken but not entirely destroyed. And she kept her distance, kept her opinions to herself, let them navigate their own path without her interference. It was harder than she had expected, this business of not meddling. Emma wanted to push them together, to smooth over the awkward moments, to orchestrate the reconciliation she knew they both wanted. But she had promised herself, had promised Mr. Knightley, that she would let people make their own choices. And so she watched and waited, biting her tongue, trusting that love, if it was real, would find its own way. And slowly, tentatively, it did. Robert Martin began to call at Mrs. Goddard's school, to walk with Harriet through the lanes of Highbury, to show her the farm and the life he could offer her. And Harriet, humbled by her own mistakes and freed from Emma's misguided ambitions for her, allowed herself to see him clearly, to see his goodness, his steady kindness, the real and honest love he offered her. When Robert Martin proposed the second time, Harriet accepted with genuine joy. And Emma, hearing the news, felt a relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She had not ruined Harriet's life after all. The damage had been real, the pain significant, but in the end, love had proven stronger than pride, and Harriet had found her way to happiness. "I am so glad," Emma told her when Harriet came to share the news. "So glad, Harriet. You deserve this happiness, and Robert Martin is a good man who will value you as you should be valued." "Thank you, Miss Woodhouse," Harriet said, her face glowing with a contentment that Emma had never seen before. "Thank you for bringing us back together, even though I know how difficult it must have been for you to simply step back and let us find our own way." Emma smiled, accepting the gratitude even though she knew she did not entirely deserve it. She had made mistakes, had caused harm, had nearly destroyed what she was now being thanked for preserving. But she had also learned, had grown, had changed in ways that made her believe she might, eventually, become the person Mr. Knightley saw when he looked at her with love. And that perhaps was enough. Not to be perfect, not to be always right, but to be willing to learn, to change, to become better than she had been. That was all any person could hope for. And Emma, standing at the threshold of her own new beginning, intended to spend the rest of her life trying to live up to that hope. The autumn came again to Highbury, bringing with it the gentle fading of summer's heat into the crisp, golden days that Emma had always loved. And this autumn was different from any that had come before, because it brought with it the promise of 3 weddings, 3 endings and beginnings woven together in a way that felt almost like redemption. Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax were to be married first, a quiet ceremony befitting the complicated circumstances of their engagement. Jane had forgiven Frank for the pain he had caused her, though Emma suspected that forgiveness had not come easily or quickly. But love, real love, finds ways to bridge even the widest gaps, and Jane's love for Frank had proven strong enough to survive the trials he had put it through. Emma called on Jane the week before the wedding, bringing a small gift and her warmest wishes. They sat together in the Bateses' small parlor, and Emma was struck by how much had changed between them. The reserve that had once characterized Jane's manner toward Emma was gone, replaced by a tentative but genuine warmth. "I never thanked you properly," Jane said quietly, "for your kindness after the truth came out. You had every right to be angry with me, with both of us, for the deception we practiced. But you were generous and understanding, and I will not forget it. We were both learning difficult lessons," Emma said. I think we have both emerged wiser from the experience, even if the path to wisdom was painful." Jane smiled, and for the first time Emma saw in her face the happiness that had always been hidden beneath the reserve and the pain. "I am going to be married," Jane said, wonder in her voice. "After everything, after all the secrecy and the heartache, I am going to be Mrs. Frank Churchill, and I will never have to hide what I feel again." Emma felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I wish you every happiness, Jane, truly. You deserve love that is open and honest, love that you do not have to hide from the world." "As do you," Jane said, reaching out to squeeze Emma's hand. "I hear congratulations are in order for you as well. Mr. Knightley is a good man. He will make you very happy." "He already does," Emma said simply. The wedding of Frank and Jane took place on a bright September morning, with only close family and friends in attendance. Emma watched as they exchanged their vows, as Frank looked at Jane with an intensity that suggested he understood, finally, the value of what he had nearly lost. And Jane, pale but radiant in her simple white dress, looked at Frank with a trust that had been hard-won, but was all the stronger for the trials it had endured. It was not a perfect love story, Emma thought as she watched them. It was marked by mistakes and pain and choices that had hurt innocent people. But it was real, and it was theirs, and perhaps that was what mattered in the end. 2 weeks after Frank and Jane's wedding came the marriage of Harriet Smith and Robert Martin. It was a small affair, held at the church in Highbury, with Mrs. Goddard and a few of Harriet's friends from the school in attendance. Emma had worried that Harriet might feel embarrassed by the modesty of the occasion, might regret not having a grander ceremony. But watching Harriet's face as she stood beside Robert Martin, Emma saw only pure, uncomplicated joy. Robert Martin looked at Harriet as though she were the answer to every prayer he had ever prayed. And Harriet looked at him with a gratitude and affection that went far deeper than the shallow infatuations Emma had once encouraged her to pursue. This was real, Emma thought. This was the kind of love that lasted, that built lives and families and happiness that did not depend on status or fortune, but on simple, steady devotion. Emma had asked Mr. Knightley to give Harriet away, since she had no family of her own to perform that office. And watching Mr. Knightley place Harriet's hand in Robert Martin's, seeing the approval and genuine affection in his expression, Emma felt a profound gratitude for the way everything had worked out. It could have been so much worse. The damage Emma had caused could have been permanent, could have destroyed Harriet's chance at happiness. But somehow, through grace or luck or the resilience of love itself, Harriet had found her way back to the man who truly valued her. "I am so happy," Harriet whispered to Emma after the ceremony, her eyes shining with tears. "Happier than I ever thought possible. Miss Woodhouse, I know I said it before, but thank you. Thank you for bringing us back together, even though I know how hard it was for you to step back and let us find our own way." "The happiness is all yours, Harriet," Emma said, embracing her warmly. "You and Robert created this, not me. I simply stopped interfering long enough for love to work itself out." "Still," Harriet said, "I am grateful, and I hope you will visit us sometimes at Abbey Mill Farm. I would like us to remain friends, if that is possible." "I would like that very much," Emma said, and meant it. She had learned so much from Harriet, from the consequences of her meddling and the grace of Harriet's forgiveness. This friendship, built on honest acknowledgement of past mistakes, felt more real than the unequal relationship they had maintained before. Robert Martin came to claim his bride, and Emma watched them leave the church together, embarking on their new life with a simplicity and contentment that Emma had once thought too ordinary to be worth pursuing. But she understood now that she had been wrong about that, as she had been wrong about so many things. Happiness was not found in status or consequence or the admiration of society. It was found in love that was honest and steady, in partnership that was built on mutual respect, in the quiet joys of daily life shared with someone who knew you and loved you anyway. And that brought Emma to her own wedding, which was to take place in early October, when the leaves were turning gold and crimson, and the air carried the first hint of the winter to come. She and Mr. Knightley had debated the details at length, where to live, how to manage their responsibilities to their respective households, how to care for Mr. Woodhouse, who could not bear the thought of Emma leaving Hartfield. The solution they had arrived at was unconventional, but felt right. Mr. Knightley would move to Hartfield rather than Emma moving to Donwell Abbey. They would divide their time between the two estates, ensuring that Mr. Woodhouse was never left alone, but also that Donwell was properly managed. It was not the traditional arrangement, but Emma and Mr. Knightley were not a traditional couple, and the solution suited them both. "I would live anywhere," Mr. Knightley had said when they discussed it, "as long as I am with you. Hartfield Donwell, a cottage in the country, it does not matter. You are my home, Emma. Wherever you are is where I want to be." And Emma, who had once thought herself too independent to ever need anyone, who had prided herself on her self-sufficiency, had discovered that there was a deeper kind of freedom in admitting that she needed him, that her life was immeasurably better with him in it, that home was not a place but a person who knew her completely and loved her anyway. As her wedding day approached, Emma found herself reflecting on the year that had passed, on all the mistakes she had made and the lessons she had learned. She had been so certain of herself at the beginning, so confident in her understanding of people and love and happiness. And she had been wrong about almost everything. But through being wrong, through making mistakes and facing the consequences and learning to be humble, she had found something more valuable than the easy confidence she had started with. She had found wisdom and empathy and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly care for other people. She had learned that love was not something to be orchestrated or controlled, but something to be honored and respected and allowed to grow in its own way. And most importantly, she had learned that she did not have to be perfect to be loved. Mr. Knightley knew all her faults, had seen her at her worst, had witnessed every error in judgment and every failure of kindness. And he loved her anyway, not in spite of her imperfections, but as a complete person who was valuable even with all her flaws. That was the greatest gift, Emma thought as she prepared for her wedding morning. Not just to be loved, but to be known and loved, to be seen clearly and valued anyway. It was a gift she had never thought to ask for, but it was the one that had changed her life more than any other. The wedding took place on a perfect October morning, with the sun streaming through the windows of the church and the whole of Highbury in attendance. Emma stood beside Mr. Knightley, George, she could call him George now, and spoke her vows with a certainty and joy that came from the depths of her heart. This was right, this was real. This was the happiness she had been searching for without knowing what she sought, found at last in the steady, patient love of the man who had been beside her all along. When the ceremony was over and they walked out of the church together as husband and wife, Emma looked around at the assembled faces, Mrs. Weston beaming with maternal pride, Mr. Woodhouse dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief, Harriet and Robert Martin holding hands and smiling, even Jane and Frank Churchill looking genuinely happy for them. And she felt a profound gratitude for this community that had witnessed her growth, had forgiven her mistakes, had celebrated her happiness. This was Highbury, this was home, and she would spend the rest of her life here, learning and growing and trying to be worthy of the love and patience that had been extended to her. It was not the ending Emma would have imagined for herself a year ago. It was quieter, more ordinary, less dramatic than the romantic scenarios she had once entertained. But it was real, and it was hers, and as she looked up at her husband and saw the love in his eyes, Emma knew with absolute certainty that she would not trade this reality for any fantasy she could have invented. Love, it turned out, was not what she had thought it was, but what it actually was, patient and honest and grounded in deep knowledge of another person, was so much better than anything her imagination could have created. And Emma, finally free of her need to control and orchestrate and meddle, was ready to simply live it, to experience each day as it came, to build a life with the man she loved based on trust and honesty and the quiet, enduring joy of being truly known. And so our story comes to rest, like autumn leaves settling gently to the ground after a season of growth and change. Emma's journey has taken her from the certainty of youth to the humility of wisdom, from the pride that comes from never being challenged to the strength that comes from facing one's own flaws and choosing to become better. She began as Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever, and rich, a young woman who thought she understood everything about love and happiness because she had observed it from the safety of her comfortable life. She ended as Emma Knightley, still handsome and clever and rich, but tempered now by the knowledge that understanding people requires more than observation. It requires empathy, honesty, and the courage to admit when you are wrong. The matchmaker who thought she could orchestrate other people's happiness learned that the heart cannot be managed or controlled, that love finds its own path regardless of our plans for it. The young woman who thought herself above the vulnerabilities of ordinary affection discovered that love, when it is real, is not a weakness but the greatest strength we possess. Through error and embarrassment and pain, Emma learned what it meant to truly see other people, not as characters in her own story, not as projects to be improved or puzzles to be solved, but as living, feeling souls with their own desires and their own right to choose their own paths. She learned that kindness is not about grand gestures, but about small, daily choices to think before speaking, to listen rather than assume, to honor other people's feelings even when it costs us our pride. And perhaps most importantly, she learned that being known, truly, completely known, with all your faults and failures visible, and still being loved, still being valued, is the greatest gift one person can give another. Mr. Knightley gave her that gift. He had seen her at her worst, had witnessed every mistake, every moment of arrogance, every failure of judgment. And he had loved her through it all, not because she was perfect, but because she was herself, capable of growth, capable of change, capable of becoming better than she had been. That love, patient and honest and grounded in deep knowledge, was what Emma had been searching for without knowing it. Not the dramatic passion of novels, not the flattering attention of charming strangers, but the steady, enduring affection of someone who knew her completely and chose her anyway. The women in this story, Emma, Jane, Harriet, each learned something about love and about themselves. Jane learned that love should not require you to hide who you are, that affection expressed openly and honestly is worth more than all the secret passion in the world. Harriet learned that real happiness comes not from aspiring to what others think you should want, but from recognizing and honoring what your own heart truly desires. And Emma learned that the heart she should have been tending was her own, that understanding yourself is the necessary precursor to understanding anyone else. The men, too, grew through this story. Frank Churchill learned, perhaps, that deception carries a cost even when the intentions behind it are understandable. Robert Martin learned that patience and genuine affection can survive rejection and misunderstanding, that love offered honestly will find its way back if it is meant to. And Mr. Knightley, dear, steady Mr. Knightley, learned that sometimes the person you have known your whole life can surprise you, can grow and change and become even more worth loving than you had imagined. Highbury itself was changed by the events of this year. The village that had seemed so fixed, so certain in its social arrangements and expectations, proved to be more flexible, more forgiving than anyone might have expected. 3 weddings, each crossing the lines of what society said was proper or expected, were celebrated rather than condemned. Love proved stronger than status, and happiness proved more important than propriety. There is something hopeful in that, something worth carrying with us. The world Emma lived in was not so different from our own. It had its rigid expectations, its social hierarchies, its rules about who belonged with whom. But love, being love, found ways to bridge those divisions, to create families and futures that did not conform to what was expected, but were all the more precious for being freely chosen. As you drift toward sleep tonight, let Emma's story rest gently in your mind. Think of the warm autumn light streaming through the windows at Hartfield, of the sound of footsteps on the lane leading to home, of the comfort of being known and loved. Think of mistakes forgiven, lessons learned, happiness found in the most unexpected places. Everyone makes errors in judgment. Everyone has moments when pride or fear or simple human foolishness leads them astray. What matters is not that we never fail, but that we are willing to admit our failures, to learn from them, to become wiser and kinder and more thoughtful because of them. Emma's story is a reminder that growth is always possible, that change is not a weakness but a strength, that becoming better than we were is the work of a lifetime. And it is also a reminder that love, when it is real, does not demand perfection. It offers grace and patience and the steady assurance that you are valued for who you truly are, not for who you think you should be. Mr. Knightley loved Emma not in spite of her faults, but as a whole person, flawed and learning and worth every moment of his patience. That is the kind of love worth waiting for, worth working for, worth treasuring when you find it. So sleep now, knowing that growth is possible, that mistakes can be forgiven, that love finds its way to those who are brave enough to be honest about who they are. Let the story of Emma Woodhouse and her journey from certainty to wisdom rest in your heart like a warm blanket, comforting and gently illuminating the path toward becoming the best version of yourself. Tomorrow you will wake to your own life, your own choices, your own opportunities to be kind or to be humble or to be brave. But tonight, rest in the knowledge that everyone, even those who seem so certain and so confident, is learning as they go, making mistakes and trying again, reaching for wisdom one small choice at a time. The autumn light fades to dusk over Highbury, and Emma sits beside her husband in the drawing room at Hartfield, watching the fire burn low, grateful for the journey that brought her here, ready for whatever comes next. She has learned her lessons, she has found her love, and she is, at last, at peace with herself and the world. May you find that same peace, that same acceptance of your own imperfect, growing, beautifully human self. May you be known and loved, may you forgive and be forgiven, may you learn and grow and become more today than you were yesterday. Good night, sweet dreams, and thank you for spending this evening with Emma and her story. May it bring you rest, and may you wake tomorrow with a little more grace for yourself and those around you. Sleep well.